Oh, audio out. Thank you. Hopefully now we've got it figured out. I told you this is a test. So everything, let me know in the comments if there's something that's not working, let me know. But hopefully, let me know if you can hear me now. Throw up thumbs up or a black rosy flex. Okay, fantastic. The audio is back now. So, again, some of the things I'm going to be troubleshooting, but what I was saying is that a lot of locked on listeners, and I can see from my timeline, people who are in the Seattle Kraken mix have been following the PWHL. Some of you are new to women's hockey, some of you are tried and true, like myself, to women's hockey. Either way, this is going to be an opportunity for us to have a conversation. You can also ask me questions about the Seattle Kraken. But I'm really going to be testing out a few things. So I'm glad that you told me about the audio. Please, if there's anything that looks funky, let me know. This is definitely, it's serving a few different purposes, this live stream, and I want to make sure that we get things going. So the game that we're going to use, the live stream. Okay, thank you so much. I see Striatic, I see Zap. Thank you so much for joining. Again, if y'all have any questions, all things are open. As I said earlier, I don't know if the audio was out or not. This is a little bit of a hybrid, testing some things on my end. That means it's also going to be a watch along. So something that we can do here. It's also going to be kind of like an AMA. You can ask me any questions that you have. It can be a Q&A specifically about the PWHL. You can ask me questions about the Seattle Kraken. But what I'm going to be able to do, hopefully, if all of the tech works as it should, is what you will be able to see is me updating things like we're getting ready to go in the first period, or Montreal scores and then they don't, and then Minnesota scores and then they don't. Can you have negative points? Apparently you can't have negative points. So I'm trying a different score bug and different ways. So you should be able to see everything up on the second screen that does not have me in it. I want to be able to play around with the configuration. So you might see me play around with different things, but right now we're going to keep it here. Are we allowed to say controversial statements like New York shouldn't have started Corrine Schroeder in their second, should have started Corrine Schroeder in their second game? Yes, you absolutely can say that. I actually was talking to some people in another group chat that I have, and I was saying my eye test tells me that Corrine Schroeder is the better goaltender between the two. We saw Levy and net yesterday for PWHL New York. Now, they did end up losing that game, but I think there were some controversial calls. We've already got controversial calls, a few of them actually, as if you are watching along right now at Tria Rink, this is supposed to be the largest game in PWHL history. Attendance wise, 12,000 plus is the expectation. So the teams are being ushered out right now, which is super cool. And we have each of the players from Minnesota being introduced. They have a young skater with them. We see that a lot in soccer in particular, and that's super cool. I put the link to the Minnesota stream in the chat at the top. I can probably pin this for those watching on YouTube, and we'll go from there. But yes, I do think that between the two goaltenders that we've seen from PWHL New York, I do think that Schroeder is the better goaltender. I'm not surprised. I had the honor of calling games in the PHF when Corrine Schroeder was on the Boston team. She had a fantastic rookie season. And as my co-host of the Founding Four podcast and I often debate, Angelica Rodriguez kind of felt that maybe the numbers were skewed. And I said, oh, no. This is not a Boston Pride team of years past. This is a real deal goaltender, and Corrine Schroeder is absolutely that. We'll get into the rosters a little bit and the projected lines for the two teams playing tonight, which of course is Montreal and Minnesota. Both have already played. Minnesota has a win in their pocket. The Montreal team, I almost said Montreal Force. That is a force of habit. Montreal Force played in the Premier Hockey Federation, the league that preceded this. And the name that preceded PHF was NWHL, National Women's Hockey League. So again, this is kind of a little bit of a mix of a lot of things. If you have questions, if I say something that doesn't make sense, let me know. But pro Toronto bias in the officiating. I'm 90% joking. I don't know that it's a bias necessarily, and joke appreciated and completely understood. I think if anything, I reported on this for CBS Sports, and for any of you who are a part of the Black Rosie Media Patreon posse, then you know that I had snippets of my conversation with Jana Heffer that I posted for you a couple of weeks ago. But what we're seeing is that the PWHL is using AHL/NHL rules, and they're using AHL and NHL experienced officials. And they released their rule book on January 1st, the same day that the league started. I know that they had been working to finalize things, but I think what we're seeing when it comes to officiating, quite honestly, is a little bit of the officials getting used to covering women's hockey, but also now have to get familiar with a women's hockey league that is innovating the rules by which they're used to officiating. And so I think there are a few things that we saw. A lot of people have been pointing out the physicality, which I'm of a few different thoughts there. One is, if you listen to Locked on Kraken, which I know some of you do, I don't really care for that aspect being blown out of proportion within the context of the actual skating and hockey skill that happens. I do think bringing physicality to hockey is a skill, but hitting and physicality are not necessarily the same thing for me. And so I think people have been seeing a little bit of the contact that's kind of two bodies bouncing off of each other, and have really gravitated to that in the first few PWHL games, which is understandable and fine. But I think if you watched last night's game, where PWHL New York, who was having their home game in Connecticut, they hosted PWHL Toronto. And I think in that game, we saw some of the physicality get out a little bit out of hand. And we've also seen that, unfortunately, in the NHL. When I was listing out the All-Stars on the Locked on Kraken show, because Oliver Bjorkstrand named to the first group of 32, I remember thinking, I had a really salty little thought that I don't believe I shared on the podcast, because it was just me in my salt. But I remember thinking, oh man, I really hope Connor Bedard's All-Star appearance doesn't get ruined because of an injury and someone, doing a dirty hit on a rookie with a promising career and a promising season. Lo and behold, the New Jersey Devils, I forget the player right now off the top of my head, but Connor Bedard takes a check straight to the face. And again, something that I talk about a lot in my hockey coverage, in men's professional hockey, you're only wearing visors, so you don't have your mouth protected. And he takes a stick to the face. It's a fractured jaw for Connor Bedard. Is this going to be the hit that changes the conversation when it comes to hockey hits or even visors in the NHL? I'm not really betting any money on that, but we have seen, whether it's Kawhi Leonard or I always forget this catcher's name. He was the catcher for the San Francisco Giants for a while. Anyway, these kind of, quote unquote, generational players, or like superstars in the league, or up and coming superstars. Most of the time when we see league and policy changes to rules, we see them because superstars got injured. That's how we got the closeout rule in all of basketball, not just in the NBA, but in all of basketball. And again, why the heck can't I remember? I see his face clear as day. He has like a baby face. Anyway, and that's what we saw in baseball when we saw Buster Posey. There it is. When we saw Buster Posey, you used to be able to cover the whole plate and stand your ground as a catcher, and the ball didn't have to be on its way. You stand your ground, and the running batter has to, runner or batter, I guess, because they're not always, anyway, that's a whole nother thing. The runner has to work around you. Now the rule is that the runner has right of way, and if you're not playing the ball, as in the ball's not on its way to you, you have to have a clear path to home plate. That's because Buster Posey, he was doing what most catchers do, what I grew up learning how to do, and he straddled the base. He was waiting on the ball, but the runner came first and completely upended and cut under him because, again, he's in the base path. But the way his leg twisted and contorted, I think he straight up broke like a bone, lower body. Anyway, I don't know if I haven't really seen much conversation, but usually in sports, unfortunately, to some extent, when we see superstars get hurt in ways that have already been controversial, that's when we start to see rule changes. I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen here, but we shall see. Looks like they're going through anthems right now for PWHL Montreal at PWHL Minnesota, but I thought this was never ever done before. Listen, Mike, I think I know you well enough to know that you are kind of joking here, but just for clarity's sake, the PWHL, and I think I know what you're talking about, I guess I should say. So if I'm saying the wrong thing, let me know, Mike. But the PWHL is a new league. Yes. The PWHL Minnesota is not the first women's pro team in the state of Minnesota. That belongs to the Minnesota Whitecaps, arguably a few times over. The story about the Minnesota Whitecaps is, I guess, kind of like the Seattle Metropolitans. Well, that's a little bit different. But anyway, the Seattle Metropolitans won the Stanley Cup before the NHL, right? And the Minnesota Whitecaps actually won the Clarkson Cup without being a part of the CWHL. And when they became an expansion team in the NWHL, which, as I mentioned earlier, then became the PHF, they won that in their first season. So the Minnesota Whitecaps were the only franchise to win a Clarkson Cup and an Isabel Cup. And now PWHL Minnesota will try to win whatever the cup is called in the PWHL. We don't quite know yet. But so this league, the PWHL, is new. Started on January 1st. Women's pro hockey is not new, not just to the state of Minnesota, but overall. Like I said, I called games for the NWHL/PHF, because again, name change. I called games for that league for 7 seasons. I actually was the longest tenured broadcaster on the radio waves, the only one to make over 100 broadcasts in that league. So that's a huge feat. 100 broadcasts in hockey comes in effectively 1 season. It took me 7 seasons to do that in women's hockey, just because of how many games are played, how many teams there are, and the frequency of play. Anyway, so women's hockey, women's pro hockey, not new, certainly not new to North America, not new overall. There are places to play professionally in Switzerland, in Sweden, in China, and other places as well. And Canada used to have a league that was, some might argue, amateur/semi-pro. That is before they started paying players, which they did in their latter years. But then the CWHL folded right before the 2019 Women's World Championships in Finland. And there's a lot of other drama, but we've got a long game ahead of us. I'm happy to get into specific questions if you have those there. Hitting is all fun until someone gets seriously injured. Again, are people going to get worked up because Connor Bedard, who's been on the radar, he has a fractured jaw? A fractured jaw. And honestly, to me, the hit was unnecessary, but having a fractured jaw in men's professional hockey doesn't seem like a hard thing. Like, I feel like there are a lot of ways you could fracture your jaw because your jaw is fully exposed, unless you're a goaltender or unless you're wearing a bubble or a cage, because you've already fractured your jaw. Your jaw is completely, your nose, your eye socket. Like, I just don't understand visors. And I don't understand why people brought the visor conversation to women's hockey. But speaking of women's women's hockey. We are officially underway, so I get to change the score bug. It is period number 1 right now, and this is Montreal versus Minnesota. Minnesota's first home game, second game for each of these teams respectively. Montreal lost the other day. Who are they playing? They were playing Ottawa, and Minnesota got a win in their first game. There is a little bit of a trend right now happening in the PWHL where the home team has dropped their home opener to the visiting team. We'll see if that trend continues. And they don't have on the stream for the PWHL shots, but I'll try to see if I can keep up with live shots. Oh, or Ottawa lost, Montreal won. Oh, my mistake there. I thought it was the other way around. There was some controversy there too, though, with Michaela Grant-Mentis and her goal. Or non-goal. It turned out to be a non-goal. But yeah, here we go. PHL Minnesota. Oh, they do. Okay. See, here we go. I have not seen shots on goal on the score bug, but they have them here. So now that means that I can, this is what I'm kind of testing. So now I can test out shots on goal, and I can put up the shots on goal. They're saying Montreal has 1 shot. So there we go. It should be on our score bug now. This is pretty cool. All right. So I'm still, like I said, I'm still working on all of this. It was an OT. I do know that game went to overtime. I thought, well, whatever. I've been wrong about so many things today, including what time of day it even is. Okay, let's go to these 2 teams. Like I said, all of the PWHL teams have been in action already. And we have a few players that I really want to shout out on the Minnesota, on both teams, including some of the players for Team Czechia. Anyone who listens to my women's hockey coverage, you know that I am all about Team Czechia. I just think they have some really promising players, and that they are the future of women's hockey at the pro level and at the international level. So they're really jockeying to be a top 4 team alongside, of course, the United States, Canada, and then it's usually Finland in that mix, sometimes Sweden. Sweden's had a rough go of it. Finland's had a tough time as well. Switzerland here and there. Japan has found their way in the top 4 women's international level. But some really good looks here from this Montreal team. They're going to be a fast squad. They have a lot of really great forwards. So Montreal has Teresa Vanishova. If you watched the Premier Hockey Federation, if you watched that amazing overtime championship game between Toronto and Minnesota, then you should know Teresa Vanishova. She is the left winger on a line with engaged skaters Marie-Philippe Poulin and Laura Stacey, both who play for Team Canada. Teresa Vanishova plays for Team Czechia, as I mentioned. They also, Montreal has Sarah Bujold, who played for the Riveters last year and is quite a skater. She is strong. She is fast. A lot of her Riveters teammates talked a lot about her work ethic. And so she's with O'Neill and Murphy. And then you have Sarah Lafleur with David and Dalton. Leah Lum coming over from PHF. From the PHF era, she played for Toronto and is now with Montreal. And Lum is on that left wing along with Jillian Dempsey and Kennedy Marchment. And the Lum-Dempsey Marchment line is listed as their 4th line, which is wild to me because those 3 athletes were fantastic in the PHF. So it's going to be really good. Okay, the benefits and downsides of the 3-point system for wins. Now, the 3-point system, actually, the first time I saw it was in PHF, and that was under Ty Timinia, who really integrated a lot of pretty cool things into women's ice hockey, which now we see 3 points being one of them. I think the demise of a 3-point system, and I kind of allude to this sometimes with Locked on Kraken, is that, well, first of all, it's just not something something that's familiar, and so it takes some getting used to. It definitely took some getting used to, and then when I would like quote unquote code switch, I would say things on the Locked on Kraken podcast because I was thinking of the PHF point system. And so, it's a little confusing. What it also means is that you then have to, oh, good shot in, good block there. Montreal, they do a really good job of crowding the middle in the slot area, then really not getting much to their netminder, who I believe, let me just see, I believe it's Enrene Debien starting, but I don't have the audio on for the Minnesota broadcast. This is our first time with the the PWHL at Minnesota. So we're getting to hear their commentators. It looks like it's Rooney and net for Minnesota. Their goaltenders are Nicole Hensley, who went the other day, and Maddie Rooney, both from Team USA. As you can see right there, LaFord, who I believe played for Montreal Force last year. So this is all Montreal when it comes to shots on goal. And here I go. I get to update now. Shots on goal are 3-0 in favor of Montreal, the road team. And I think this Montreal team is pretty well built. I talked about it on Founding Four Pod. I think they really looked at the landscape and weren't afraid to get players that they thought would fit their system. But regarding the point system, I think another thing that just is going to take some getting used to is, even visually how that looks. People not always, familiar with the point system. I will say, as someone who covers the Seattle Kraken, looking at some of the ways that you can collect points other than straight up wins, losses. I mean, right now, at least, that is the difference between the Seattle Kraken being in the playoffs and not, because they were able to collect points even when they weren't getting straight out wins. And wow, Maddie Rooney had to grab from behind as it was that Vanishova line, just a pestering line there, knew they would be. That's, again, quote unquote, the fourth line. Vanishova is on the top line with Poulin and Stacy. I was thinking of the Lum, Dempsey, Marchment line, also a formidable grouping there. But you see that this is a Montreal squad already. They're playing aggressive. They're really good at regaining puck possession in their offensive zone. So Minnesota a little bit on the back foot there. Again, Montreal in the neutral zone, just an aggressive forecheck, and they stop the rush. And they stop Minnesota from moving the puck forward. Minnesota now is trying to start these stretch passes, but you see, again, Montreal standing them up on the blue line. They're able to win possession back in their defensive zone. Just a really great Montreal team. We see Lashkova, also from Team Czechia, is on the blue line for this Montreal team. Really good at keeping Minnesota out of the zone, just a one and done chance, keeping the puck away from their goaltender, and they're keeping them wide as well. You see that as soon as someone from Minnesota even gets close to the puck, Montreal swarms. That is a great conditioned team. It's a team that understands the importance of forechecking and being aggressive in all three zones, trying to win puck battles in all three zones. You can see they want to play a possession-oriented game, but now it's Minnesota able to dispossess Montreal, and then some really great skating and a light shot in, but some great work there by the Minnesota squad. But now Montreal coming the other way. Another reason I wanted to do this is because I get to practice my chops at play-by-play, which I will be doing in a couple of weeks. I want to go back to the Minnesota lineup. On their left wing, they have Grishova, Heisey, Taylor Heisey, and Kendall Coyne-Schofield listed as their first line. And then they have Tampany, Panic, and Zumwinkle. Between the three of them, a lot of international experience. Britton Fleming, Sheppers, and Kunin. Budarak, Bryant, DeGeorge, and Kava is that forward, that odd forward out right now. On the blue line, Steckline, Flattery, Channel, Butchbinder, and Greco, and Cook. And as I mentioned, Maddie Rooney in net right now for Minnesota. Amanda Levier also on this squad. Haven't seen her. Lee Steckline I cannot wait to see Lise Steckline play this season. She has retired from the national program from Team USA after a really great career. She, you know, she before the last Olympics felt like she wasn't sure if she would come back to the team, the national team, but she did. That was a heartbreaking, a really tough tournament for the USA. They lost Brianna Decker in one of the first games. She broke her leg. I remember hearing that in the arena. I was there in Beijing, China, and that was a really tough injury. And they also had a different coaching staff, a coaching staff. There had been a lot of coaching changes for the USA team for a lot of different reasons, but I think they're doing well with their coaching staff now, understands what the players are trying to do, and kind of understands a little bit better, in my opinion, where the game is right now. So that's good on the Minnesota squad. But we're scoreless right now, 12:32 left in the first period. And again, the shots on goal that we're seeing on the stream say that it's all Montreal when it comes to shots on goal. So we'll see what's going on there. But I think it's been great to see the support for the league so far. It's a little bittersweet for people like me who have seen women's hockey really struggle to get some of the support. I know that there are people who are very excited to be at their first PWHL game or excited to be supporting the team that's local to them. But there's also a part of me, if I'm being honest, that is looking at some of these people who have a pretty high celebrity when it comes to maybe the NHL and saying, listen, Hillary Knight played for every iteration of women's pro hockey that existed in Boston before the PWHL. She won a Clarkson Cup with the Boston Blades. She won the Isabel Cup with the Boston Pride. So, I just always think it's interesting as Montreal has an opportunity here, but the give and go with Poulin and Stacy just couldn't get that on Poulin's blade. But again, Montreal, so great at just being able to regroup in the offensive zone. They got a few other chances after that 2-on-1 or 2-on-none really breakaway. And now giving Rooney fits as this one pops out, but it's Minnesota now able to come up with it. They're just going to try and clear this in the neutral zone, but a great back check by the one and only Marie-Philippe Poulin, and that's a thing that people don't give Poulin enough credit for. I was able to talk to her in Beijing. And the one thing that she said she committed to ahead of those Olympics, or I keep saying 2018. 2018 was Pyeongchang. My dates, my times, my years, my time zones are all screwed up. Before the last Olympics, which was in Beijing 2022, I got to speak to Marie-Philippe Poulin at the Olympics. And one thing that she said she focused on, especially when things were kind of up in the air, 2022 Olympics, you'd already seen the Tokyo Summer Olympics get halted for a year because of COVID. It was kind of down to the wire for myself, and I can only imagine for the athletes, knowing if we'd even be able to get to Beijing. But what Marie-Philippe Poulin did in that time, she focused on being a better player defensively. And I think you've actually seen her opportunities open up when she's been able to do that. Another thing that you saw that I really liked from that Canadian squad is that they gave Sarah Nurse more responsibility. And sometimes that responsibility meant that she was the fourth line center. Sometimes it meant that she was, the top line winger or any combination in between. And Sarah Nurse always stepped up. And I love that. I love talking to Troy Ryan about Sarah Nurse. I love talking to Sarah Nurse about Troy Ryan. There's some mutual respect there. Sarah Nurse once told me that she felt it's almost like they grew up together, quote unquote. I mean, she's talking about in the Hockey Canada system, that is, but a lot of mutual respect, a lot of time that they spend together, game planning, not just for Sarah, who was coming off an injury before having an MVP caliber performance at the 2022 Olympics. She was the MVP of that tournament, of the entire tournament, women's tournament. But she wasn't even sure she'd make the team due to injury. And what a comeback. What a great player she was in those Olympics. Now we have the shots on goal 6-2 in favor of Montreal. So Minnesota finally getting something going here in front of this home crowd, but still scoreless as we reach the 10-minute mark here, the halfway point. Montreal on the road taking on Minnesota in the PWHL. I guess what you could say, we're almost at our second week of play here since play started officially on the 1st. Nice move again by Montreal. Stood up by Rooney and did not give them a second chance. That back door was wide open. Once again, Montreal just exposing Minnesota. They're getting in behind the defense. They're standing them up on the blue lines for entries and exits, and that just gives Montreal all the ice they want. Maddie Rooney really having to stand tall for this Minnesota squad. Again, testing out a few things here. So thanks so much for joining this live stream. Now we're on the Locked On Kraken podcast page right now, or YouTube channel. And as some of you who've been on this channel before know, we've done watch alongs. And what I want to be able to do is have a graphic that we can change. I can do some fun things with the software that we have here, change it from this and then go back to one with the score bug. So I'm figuring that all out. But thank you so much for joining us. If we're meeting for the first time, my name is Erica L. Ayala. I'm the host of Locked On Kraken, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. I've been trying to make a case for Locked On NHL to give us our own women's hockey show. So a great way for you to continue to support, hopefully, the growth in that direction is by listening to the Locked On NHL women's hockey segment, which is right now only bi-weekly. I would love to have something every week that's not just a segment, so anywhere from 8 to 12 minutes, but that's a full show. We do 30-minute shows on Locked On NHL, and so really trying to get that going here. And so one of the offerings, hopefully, is that we can do these watch-alongs. I've been very impressed with the defense of all of the teams. Excellent, attentive players and team structure. Less frustrating defense to watch than certain NHL teams. That's very interesting, and I guess that's why I really love watching the women's game, because you're right. And those who know me know I love good defense. I do think PWHL Toronto, their defense has led them astray a time or two. They talked about that against the PWHL New York in Connecticut. I guess that was last night. They talked about that during last night's game, that some of those opportunities that they let up, they felt were because they weren't as defensively sound as they wanted to be. But here's the thing. When you are playing defense in the women's game, you really have to play defense. When we see kind of positionless hockey, which I started talking to a lot of players and coaches, especially about, such as, and here goes Montreal again, they are just using their speed, and they are a tenacious group. They kind of are like Montreal, that is like if everyone had like elite level Brandon Tanev / Ryan Donato kind of energy on within every player on their squad. These are just players on the Montreal team that love to skate. They are smart and they are fearless. They play a ferocious style of hockey, and it's going to make them really fun to watch. Minnesota has a lot of Minnesota homegrown talent, or people with Minnesotan ties or Midwest ties, which you always love to see. As I mentioned, not only is Minnesota known as being the state of hockey, but they have a really important position and history within the context of women's pro hockey. And that doesn't seem to change in the PWHL. Speaking of Minnesota, that's the first good shot in that they had on net, covered up, and we're going to get a stoppage in play here. But you just see that this Montreal team, they are pesky. They are all over the place right now. And yes, it is Anne-Renée Desbiens in net for PWHL Montreal, plays for the Canadian national team. And the power kill. So Toronto wants to be a fast team. Toronto is a team that, if any team is going to be like, that the Oilers, the Grant Fuhr years, it's going to be the Toronto team. Now, there are people that argue that maybe Toronto doesn't have, comparative to the rest of the league, the most sound goaltending, and that's, not even counting Carly Jackson, who likely is going to have to fight for some ice time in their system. And I think we did see a few chinks in the chain there. But for me, I think a little bit more of the question is, what is the defense doing in front of the Toronto goaltender? And at times, Toronto themselves said that they felt they let too much up. Now we're starting to see PWHL Minnesota. They're getting a little bit more time in their zone. They have now their third shot on goal here. They just got it on that breakaway opportunity on Anne-Renee Desbiens, and another one just now. But this is going to be a Minnesota team that they're going to have to work through the physicality and what Montreal is bringing. You're starting to see that they are doing that by carrying the puck just a little bit more across the blue line out of their defensive zone, and then looking for the pass, carrying the attention of the defense through the neutral zone, and then looking for an outlet pass as they cross over into the offensive zone. So having to change it up a little. I thought they were trying to pass out of the D zone a little bit too much, but I think carrying it out against against Montreal is going to be good, as Montreal tried for a wraparound opportunity. Now the puck is loose, but once again, cannot get it cleared. Minnesota tried a centering pass, and Montreal intercepted, and they were able to get another shot up on Rooney. Now Minnesota going the other way, and they're going to dump this into the corner. But they're having to carry into the offensive zone and then look for an outlet. But they have to try to bring numbers alongside Montreal, who's not just good on the forecheck, but they're also really good at getting back. They have aggressive sticks. Montreal playing just really, technical. They go stick to stick, body to body, which is huge. I love it. I freaking love it. I knew I was going to like how Montreal played. They just have so many smart, historically, well-decorated, seasoned veterans on their squad. And now they're all coming together to, dare I say, make a super team. And it's going to be fun to watch. It is super fun to watch. 5:12 left here in Minnesota as they try their own wraparound opportunity, and Renee Desbiens with the save. And that was Lee Steckline stepping in. I love when a defender steps in and has the confidence. She didn't see the numbers. As I was saying, Minnesota, they need to get numbers into the offensive zone. And Lee Steckline didn't have any options, so she tries to clank it in herself, but Anne-Renee Desbiens was there. But one of the more dangerous and certainly one of the closest looks that Minnesota was able to get. And that's what you want from your defenders. Lee Steckline, it's not that she is an offensive liability, but I do think that in her career, she has been known as a defense-first defender. And so I like that when she saw some open ice, she took the opportunity. You need really intellectual defenders, especially ones who are known for defense first, who are not afraid to effectively, in a manner of speaking, pull the trigger and seize an opportunity. And that was one of the better opportunities that we saw from the Minnesota squad. And that comes from not just a blue liner, but from a veteran in Lee Steckline, who also played for the Minnesota Whitecaps. She actually had the game-winning goal in overtime of that 2019 Isabel Cup championship. I will never forget for the rest of my days seeing Lee Steckline, who, she's 6 foot what now? And that's without skates. Or maybe she's a little, I'll look up her. She's tall. The point is she's tall, definitely taller than me. That's not hard. I'm like 6'5.5". But seeing her jump up and just like the sheer joy, surprise, and excitement that went through her body when she realized that she had the game winning goal. It was fantastic. I will never forget that. I was so grateful to be there for that game. And I'm a little bit sad. I'm a little bit sad that we won't get to see Lee Steckline on the national team, but we will get to see her for PWHL Minnesota. Speaking of, they have a left side face-off one controlled for a moment, now pushed down below the goal line, touched up by Montreal, and we're along the boards for a board battle here as Minnesota now on the forecheck trying to get this puck back, but they can't. And it's Montreal now trying to break through here. They just have so much speed. Headsy team here. Still scoreless here as we are under 5 minutes left in the first period. This is the home opener for PWHL Minnesota. Believe that they will set a attendance record for the PWHL, which would also render them. And I've seen some of the reports on the attendance. The truth of the matter is that women's hockey was never great at recording attendance records. I said that when I worked with the NWHL and with the PHF. Ooh, just a missed opportunity. You see that PWHL Minnesota is not afraid to feed Lee Steckline. She had a chance in the high slot. It was a nice little drop pass there. I know some people who watch the MNHL don't like drop passes. I think they're very effective in women's hockey. But Lee Steckline had a chance, a one-timer, but she just kind of flubbed her first touch there. And so didn't really put much on that. Never got to Anne-Renee Desbiens. But you see that this Minnesota team, one way or another, is going to rely on Lee Steckline. And I think that's really smart. Lee is a great player. She is definitely not a liability. Mentioned that Sarah Nurse was the MVP of the 2022 Winter Olympics. I think if the USA had won, Steckline probably would have been up there as far as my vote. I don't think she would have won because people tend to not want to give those accolades to defenders, which I find ridiculous. Game recognized game. But anyway, Lee Steckline had a fantastic tournament as well, even though it was a tournament in which the USA really struggled. And here comes Minnesota 2-on-2, backhanded chance. Don't think it ever got to Desbiens, blocked in front by Montreal. But Minnesota now, they score. Okay, this is what Minnesota is doing. They have figured out how to beat Anne-Renee Desbiens. It was 3 consecutive times where the Minnesota team, they cut in and tried on the backhand, and it would be Grace Zumwinkle gets the first ever goal for the PWHL Minnesota team at home. They're playing at Excel Center, and Grace Zumwinkle comes from the left, cuts to the right. You see that the Minnesota team does a great job regrouping here, and then once again cuts in front. Now, this is a great centering pass, but on the backhand, I'm not sure. It looks like they're going to give the goal credit to Zumwinkle. It looked like maybe, though, she was trying to cut that over for a pass, a centering pass, but they're showing Zumwinkle. I don't have the audio on. I'm kind of, again, practicing for my own games I have coming up. But Grace Zumwinkle gets Minnesota on the board, which means that I can do this on our little scorebook. I can now give a goal to PWHL Minnesota. Fantastic. Again, my name is Erica L. Ayala. I am your host of Locked on Kraken and a women's hockey commentator, women's soccer, just a commentator, NHL commentator overall. And I have some Hockey East games where I'll be actually doing play-by-play. So I'm testing out a different score bug here for us on the Locked On network, but also, as you see, Montreal now, they're kind of eager to get their own goal, but Maddie Rooney comes up big there for a save, goes right into the crest. So not much that Rooney had to do to cover that up, but Montreal fired up, as we see just this opportunity by Zumwinkle. Oh, I think Desbiens, as I see the replay, Desbiens thought she had it in the glove and it kind of sunk or snuck between the glove and her um, would be her far side arm. So just a tough break there for Debian, but that's why you throw him up on net. We had a collision at the blue line as Minnesota was entering their offensive zone, but everyone seems to be up on their feet. Play continues, at least for now. Don't see a delayed arm up, so we play on. Great backhand shot from Zumwinkle. Crowd really responded to that. I thought they were lulled to sleep a tad, but the crowd is back in it now. Well, that's because Montreal was really, when it comes to their shots on goal, when it came to their overall performance and the speed and the pace with which the game was being dictated, it was really Montreal dictating the pace. Minnesota on their back foot, but we saw as we started reaching the 10-minute mark that Minnesota started getting chances of their own. I mentioned that they knew when they needed to pass through the pressure of Montreal. Then they figured out also when they needed to skate through the pressure of Montreal. And it's been a nice mix there where they've been able to get some offensive zone time just now. And Renee Desbiens had to knock that away with her blocker a few times, came out of the crease. And now Minnesota looking for a second goal. Keeps that low on the ice, but it's covered up by Renee Desbiens. Minnesota definitely having the better part or playing better in the second half of the first period. As you see, they're showing on the replay now, Desbiens makes this save, and then it pops up. It goes off her pads, and she kind of kicks it up. This is a Minnesota squad that, although they were feeling the pressure early on, they have turned the tide and are commanding this game in a much different way than earlier on. Shots on goal 9-7 unofficially, we'll say. Now, with a minute left here in the first period, Minnesota up 1-0 on Montreal visiting. And we'll see if Montreal has one last push here, but it's Minnesota that will bring it in. You see, they are favoring that left side, and then what they do is they try to cut to the middle. They were stood up, though, at the goal line, but keep possession in the offensive zone as they do once again rim this along the boards below the goal line, coming back to that left side and tried to do a nice drop pass again, but blocked in front. Montreal is going to dump this down into the corner. 25 seconds left here. No icing called. Montreal trying to get a hold of this, but it's Minnesota that comes up with it. Battle along the boards in the neutral zone. Montreal has it. Jillian Dempsey trying to get that over to her teammate, but now with 10 seconds left, Minnesota able to dump that down. Desbiens can't control it. Montreal with 3 seconds. Don't think they'll get a shot off, and we're at zeros in the first period. Minnesota leading Montreal 1-0 in the PWHL Minnesota's home opener at Excel Center. Expecting a sold-out crowd here, or a record crowd in PWHL history. And Renee Desbiens got beat by Grace Zumwinkle. That's Hockey Canada in net versus USA Hockey on the ice. And we know that a lot of these players have experience skating against each other for their national teams, but now find themselves all together. That was part of the rub of the PWHL. A lot of people saying you needed all the best players in one league. That was never quite my argument, but here we are now. This is the only league in North America, not overall, in women's hockey, but the PWHL, as I mentioned, dropped the puck for the first time January 1st, 2024. And here we are in what's about to be week 2 of the league. Minnesota looking for their second win over Montreal. Also, Minnesota looking to break this quote unquote, curse of the home openers. None of the PWHL teams, not Toronto, not New York / Connecticut / whatever else, but nobody has been able to win their home opener. And so Minnesota in front of, again, what is expected to be a record crowd, trying to be the first ones to do that. But if you have questions for me regarding this game, regarding the Locked On show, I got my timing a little bit confused. So I still will have a Locked On show today. We're going to talk a little bit about the roster changes that we can expect. Jaden Schwartz has been skating. I know he had his bobblehead night. The boys got a good win the other day on a bobblehead night, but the Seattle Kraken are winning. They're on a win streak now as they go on a 2-week road trip. And a lot of that has been because they're focused on defense. And you know me, I love to see it. So let me know, what are your questions that you have for me in the chat? I am going to put up a different graphic here as I take a little bit of a break, get me some water, and then we'll come back and talk some more hockey, women's hockey, men's hockey, college hockey, all of the hockey. So leave your comments in the chat, and I will get to them as soon as I get back. All right, so we got to hear from Kendall Coyne Schofield there. I have not had the audio on for the game, but it was nice to hear a familiar voice, Alexis Pearson. She called games with me in the NWHL/PHF. So I'm glad to hear her on the call. You know, it's tough. It's tough to not be in the mix myself, but Alexis is great people. It's always been a joy working with her. I kind of figured, I really hoped, I'll say, that they used her. I know that she also has done work with the Minnesota Wild, so good to see her there. Question: who is the best goalie in the PWHL? Well, I don't think we know yet. And that's part of what's happened in women's hockey, is that you have some great players who have played at the national level, such as Emma Soderberg, even Emrance Mashmeyer. I mentioned Rooney and Nicole Hensley for PWHL Minnesota. You have Strider, who is coming out of the NCAA and also has Olympic experience. Now, who's going to be the best overall goalie in this league? I don't know yet, but Corrine Schroeder is the only goalie with a shutout. So right now, my answer is Corrine Schroeder. And I do think that Corrine Schroeder, although she doesn't have the international experience of some of the other names that I mentioned, I do think that she will be able to be a top goaltender in this league. But oh gosh. I mean, I can tell you I'm really excited to see Emma Soderberg at this level. I've enjoyed watching her compete at the international level, and she's had to do a lot for her national team, competing against teams like Czechia, Finland, or Czechia, the US, and Canada. She's asked to do a lot, and I'm curious to see as we, I was a little bit alluding to it, but as we talk about best on best here, it's really going to be an opportunity to see what Soderberg can do in a league where she's getting a little bit more defensive support. She's getting a little bit more offensive support. Will she still see, 50 plus shots a game and save all but one or two of them? I mean, it's possible. It's definitely possible. But I'm curious to see. So to answer that question right now, I don't know. Yeah, she's very good. Very, very good. Has had fantastic numbers at the NCAA level. Captain Kendall Coyne Schofield, they're actually doing a little segment on her right now on YouTube. Not going to let her team fail. She's such a leader, both on the ice and in the negotiating the CBA. Yeah, Kendall Coyne Schofield, definitely one of those players. Even when she played for the Minnesota Whitecaps, I remember interviewing her, and she had a lot to say about what was working in that league, what wasn't exactly working in that league. And again, the landscape for women's hockey is raw for a lot of people still. I think we're starting to get over that as we see some of these games come together. But I think I'm hopeful that we can get over some of that. There's still a lot that, in my opinion, the PWHL has to do, and we'll see if they're able to get it done. But I don't know. They're showing Alexis again, and I don't know who this gentleman is in the booth with her. But I'll also be honest, it's still a little raw for me. As I mentioned, I have called the most women's pro hockey games, and to not be a part of this league, at least right now, is tough for me. But the game goes on. There are other opportunities that will come. I'm very excited to be calling some Hockey East games again. And I'm just hopeful, like every other player, that my chance comes again. So here's hoping, but I'm really glad to see Alexis on the broadcasts. I thought she did a great job. Yeah, so we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But let me know what questions that you have. I'll be pretty honest as we're going through things here. They're talking to Natalie Darwitz right now, who's the general manager. Of course, she's a Minnesota hockey legend and is now heading up PWHL Minnesota. I think the Minnesota teams at the pro level have been built in interesting ways. They definitely do have an affinity for offensive firepower, but sometimes they've looked a little unbalanced defensively. Certainly the Minnesota Whitecaps have looked that way. We'll see how this PWHL Minnesota team comes together, but I'm excited to see what happens here. The PWHL opted for regional coverage, which is why I was really hoping Alexis would get on the regional broadcast. I know she does some radio work, I believe, for the Minnesota Wild, and the Minnesota Wild seem to be in pretty good partnership with PWHL Minnesota. So I was really hopeful that would be who they picked to call these games. Because I know that she knows women's hockey. I know that she knows hockey overall. And if I'm being honest, and we don't always get people who know the women's game covering women's hockey. And that does make a difference. It really does make a difference. And there's not always the most information available, readily available when it comes to women's hockey. I have seen that change a little bit with the not a little bit, a lot with the PWHL. Now, I still think there are things that are oversimplified and some that are not exactly accurate at all. But hopefully the cream will rise. We'll see as the coverage does continue with what we're seeing, that also things will be accurate. For example, this is not even a PWHL thing, but I was just in Seattle for the Winter Classic, and the mobile museum, well, now it's called the United by Hockey mobile museum, was out there, and they have the Metropolitan Riveters version of Black Rosie, because I have a Black Rosie that I've been using for years. But the Metropolitan Riveters version of Black Rosie is in the museum, and there's a placard that says Kelsey Colzer's Black Rosie jersey. Kelsey Colzer had been gone from the Riveters for, I think, 2 full seasons before the Black Rosie jerseys were even a thing. So, Kelsey Colzer never wore that jersey. There's no way that could be Kelsey Colzer's jersey. So actually, there were no Black players on the Riveters at the time that they unlaunched and unveiled Black Rosie. And I don't think the Riveters did a good enough job helping fans along when it came to who were the Black players that were a member of the Riveters. So Roya Tinker, one of them, but she actually played in that game where they unveiled Black Rosie, but was already on the Toronto team. So anyway, I'm a little bit of a stickler when it comes to things like that. I am a bit of a stickler when it comes to pronouncing names. I don't always do pronounce names correctly, but I always pronounce them the way that a player tells me how to pronounce it, which got me into a little bit of hot water when it came to Anne-Sophie Betty. So many people for literally years, have been calling her Anne-Sophie Betty. That's not how she says her name. Anyway, I could go on and on about that. Here is a question, and make sure you have questions about the Kraken, about hockey overall, about the PWHL, college hockey, let me know. But what do you think about all of the games being on YouTube for free for now? That's an interesting question, because one of the things that we had heard from former iterations of women's pro hockey, whether it was the CWHL that used to have games on YouTube, the NWHL had its games on YouTube, and then they were archived there. There are still games you can find from the first 2 seasons because they were kept there for posterity. And then there were also games that were streamed on YouTube and Twitch and places like that. When we saw those streams, there were people in the greater hockey community and the greater women's hockey community that thought that this was kind of Bush League. And I don't think it's YouTube that's Bush League. If anything, YouTube is the second largest search engine behind its owner, which is Google. So having a footprint on YouTube, I think, is extremely important. It's very smart. And although it's free to the user for the most part, although there are ways that you can up your YouTube game, there are also ways to monetize YouTube for creators, which is why I always say, hey, if you're not already subscribed, go subscribe to Locked On Kraken. Go subscribe to Black Rosie Media on YouTube, because it's a way to help creatives monetize. You can also create memberships on YouTube. So while it's not considered a traditional broadcast, I do think having games accessible on YouTube and hopefully archived on YouTube is critically important. I think what I will also say, and what I'm loving so far, just visually, because I'm not always listening to the games. Like right now, I'm not listening to the games because I'm talking to you. But what I can say visually is that these games, the production looks much better than any production I've been a part of. And although I think the production got better when we started using the production team in Florida, there were things that were still not great. There were still things that were clunky. Now, the thing that we're not seeing with the PWHL, even though they do have sponsors, is we're not seeing them use, first of all, let me back up a little. From a production perspective, I do think there are a lot of stoppages for the PWHL. It seems like just a lot. And for those who are familiar with any sports broadcast, there are media windows. So you'll in basketball, you hear it the most, I think. You'll hear it's an official timeout. In hockey, when you get to a certain point, any whistle that's not an icing around that time means we're going to commercial break. Some people who are watching know that, some people who are watching don't know that. Again, I think it's most obvious in basketball because you usually hear the broadcaster say, this is an official media timeout. Um, there are a lot of stoppages right now for the PWHL. It feels like to me a lot of times when the YouTube the YouTube the YouTube broadcast will go away and they don't have program, they just have a blank screen. That's something that I'd like to see change. Just from watching this Minnesota broadcast, and I mentioned that they're doing regional broadcasts in the United States. There is no national package right now in the United States. They have a few national packages, or everything really is a national package in Canada between CBC, TSN, and Sportsnet. With the regional broadcast, I've seen differences in the quality of the camera, the quality, literally the camera that they're using. So I guess resolution and lighting and color and all of that stuff. I've seen a difference in the quality of the camera persons or the camera operators and the camera angles. This is Excel Center that we're watching right now, folks. This is an arena that's made for NHL level broadcast. And so you can tell, in my opinion, the difference between this broadcast and even the broadcast that I watched last night, which was streamed on YouTube, but by regional affiliate MSG. But they were also at an arena, Bridgeport. So that's the Sound Tigers, I guess. Not the same level from what I saw. So it's an interesting question. What do I think about the games being on YouTube? I think the YouTube part is great. I also think it's ironic that there are people playing in these games who are a part of this league that had bad things to say about women's hockey being on YouTube. I don't think that's an issue. I think what we're seeing and what I like from the PWHL broadcast perspective so far is that they did put money into the broadcast itself. And I think this is outside of what we see for Worlds, this is probably the best quality broadcast that I've seen. Now, when it comes to commentating and stuff like that, because I'm in the business, I don't think it's appropriate for me to get into that. I certainly have thoughts and opinions, and I, of course, would love to be on these broadcasts, but I don't think it's fair to do that. And honestly, I haven't really listened to all of the broadcasts to have an opinion on that right now. My only opinion I have, and I haven't even heard Alexis in game, is that I like that Alexis Pearson is on here. And that's because it's a personal preference. It's a professional, professionally, I know Alexis. And so I know she knows women's hockey and I'm excited for her. But you also have Soraya Tinker, who is a part of what will be the Canadian national studio shows. You have Haley Salvian, who I know knows women's hockey. I think she's relatively new on the broadcast side, but I mean, you have so many people like Tessa, who knows what she's doing, Cheryl Pounder, who knows what she's doing. I am curious to see how they play out broadcast wise, because right now in the United States, we're going to get very regional based coverage, which I don't think is a bad thing. But, when it comes to semifinals and stuff like that, who's going to carry that, given that it depending on who's playing, we could see and how they break things down. Are they going to kind of keep things, the 3 Canadian teams, the 3 US teams? It kind of feels that way right now. I don't know. I have a lot of questions. I know you didn't ask all that. You just asked about YouTube, but that's where my mind went. Is the PWHL Minnesota using this arena for every game? Ooh, that's a good question. I think they might be, and they might be one of the only ones. I'm actually going to go to PWHL. I can't remember off the top of my head. I've been super busy with NHL stuff. So let's see. I'm going to go PWHL Minnesota all months, and they play all of their home games except for one at Xcel Energy Center. They have a game on Tuesday, February 27th that's listed as TBD. So I don't know if they did say they're going to do some neutral site games. They might try some, I don't know if it's going to be outdoor or whatever, but here's the Minnesota schedule. I toggled everything. So you can only see the Minnesota games. I don't know if that link will take you to that, but hopefully it will. All right, here we go. We're back in action at the 18:05 mark. Minnesota has that lead 1-0 on Montreal. Montreal, though, has the shots on goal in their favor. And actually, you can't even see shots on goal on my little score bug. And that's because the orientation, the way it is. But if I change it, which I think I can do, I should be able to change it. And then what do I do? Oh, and then I go here. So let me change this real quick. I can put it over here. This is what I kind of like. I'm learning how to use this score bug and see if it's going to work. So let's put this over here for now. And then I think, yeah. So now you can see shots on goal. There's also ways where I haven't done all the settings, but I have all of the team colors and logos put in. If I like this system and I think I'm going to do these more often, then we'll have everything custom for each team and their respective color. And we're really going by colors this year because the teams don't have, traditional team names. So we'll see. So now skating from right to left on your screen is Montreal trying to get in behind Maddie Rooney. They like cutting across, really deep in there. And it looks like we're going to get a penalty to Minnesota. Now, the way penalties or power plays work here is, you still can't see it. Hold on. Oh, you know why? It's because I have it. All right, hold on. I'm still learning all of this. Let's see. No, that doesn't do it either. I'll figure this out. I'll figure out how to get the score bug up. I have to reposition the graphic. Shot goes wide by Marie-Philippe Poulin. Power play for Montreal. So now if Minnesota scores shorthanded, that's the end of the power play. Or excuse me, if Montreal scores shorthanded, that's the end of the power play. What am I talking about? I was right the first time. Minnesota is on the PK. If they score shorthanded, Montreal's power play is over. Which is one of the rule book changes for the PWHL. I know the TNT crew was talking about that. I think it was Anson Carter saying, as Minnesota clears, that he wouldn't like it if you score on the power play doesn't expire. You still get the full 2 minutes. Now, of course, when you have a 4-minute, hey, Jeff. Yeah, I like that rule change too. I mean, when you have 4 or more minutes on a power play, that's how it goes. In the NHL anyway, most hockey. But I kind of like that. A 2-minute power play, if you score a goal, you just get to keep going. So, all right. Now I got to figure out the score bug orientation. That's why I'm testing everything out here. I don't know how to make it so you can see it, but we'll get there. Jeff likes the 3-2-1 point system. The 3-2-1-0 point system. I think it's going to make it hard on the maths. I am not a math person. Numbers mildly scare me. There's also a word, I forget what it is, but when you're dyslexic, but not with letters and number or letters and words, but with numbers. Yeah, I think I might be that. Oh, chance in the high slot there for Montreal. Great job picking up sticks. That's got to be Steckline there. And we're back to even strength. Shots on goal, they're saying now 11-7 in favor of Montreal. Minnesota now with a chance. Trying to go backdoor there. Both of these teams have a knack for the front of the net, not afraid to get down low. But the defense for both sides, for the most part, has been doing a really good job clearing out the net in front of their goaltender. Here we go. The math is harder, but every game being worth the same makes so much more sense. I feel you. You're seeing Minnesota start to get the offensive feel in this game. Felt that they were on their back heels for the first part of the first period, but are starting to get it together. Yeah, I agree. That is a good way to think about it. Again, the math kind of overwhelms me, or I think that's what you're talking about. Sometimes I know there's a delay and I speak so fast. But I do think that's a good way of thinking about it. Like anything, it's going to take some getting used to. That doesn't bother me too much. I know in women's hockey, we've seen a 2-point arc before. In women's basketball, we've seen that they introduced, like a 4-point shot, certain areas. There's always innovation. For as much as the average, quote unquote, let's just say North American complains about women and the fact that we dare to show up for sports at all. If you look at the history of sports, innovation has come from women's sports and from people of color, particularly Black people in sports. So you're welcome. We're always your guinea pigs, and in more egregious ways, at least in the United States. But we don't have to get into that. But Henrietta Lacks, thank you. It's interesting to see which goalies match their pads and masks and which may be waiting. So it's not only that they're waiting, but like Corrine Schroeder, I know, has a sick setup to match PWHL New York, but she wore her Boston Pride pads for her first start, which then went on to be a shutout. And I've never been a goaltender before, but I have been a catcher and an outfielder. And it was very particular about breaking in my glove. If that glove's not broken in, if those pads aren't feeling great, you haven't had a good go with them, that's probably not what you're going to wear for your PWHL debut. So I think some of it is that they're just going to wear the equipment for now that they're comfortable with. And once they have more practices, get a feel for the league, I think you'll see some of the other setups make their way. Because I know for sure Corrine Schroeder has a sick setup. Opportunity for Minnesota. And Renee Debien able to cover that puck up. Now I got to figure out this bug. I got to figure out the score bug because it's not doing exactly what I want it to do. Well, it's not that the score bug isn't. It's actually the graphics in this other setup that I have. So let me try and figure that out. But the way that it doesn't overlay the way I want it to. Let me see if I can. Yeah, like I don't think that looks good. Don't mind me as I try and figure this out. Again, this is a little bit of a catch-all live stream. It's a way for me to answer questions that you have about women's hockey, the Seattle Kraken, anything really. But I'm also practicing a little. I have some women's college hockey games. I'll be serving play-by-play for games on the 19th and 20th in the Massachusetts area. I'm super excited to go back to Hockey East this year. those are the games I have scheduled. Hopefully I'll have a few more. So I'm practicing a little. It's been a while. Usually around this time, I'd already have called almost 2 months worth of games, but um, the PHF doesn't exist. So as far as I know, Alexis is the only PHF broadcaster that has been able to get a placement in the PWHL. So I'm super excited. She's the analyst on this. I'm not listening right now, only at the intermissions, but Alexis Pearson knows her stuff. I've worked with her before. She's amazing. So anyway, but then also I'm testing out. I don't use OBS. We use a completely different system for the Locked On network, which I much prefer. But I'm learning how to use OBS because it has a scorebug feature. And we had such a great time doing watch alongs for the playoffs for Locked On Kraken. But I didn't ever have a way to update you on the score because I cannot, I'm not a licensed broadcaster. We cannot show you the live game, which a lot of people want during watch alongs, but we just cannot legally do that. And I'm not going to do that here either. As someone who works in the business, I know that it kind of sucks trying to find how to stream everything, but I think we should keep broadcasters employed is my take. But anyway, so questions you have, let me know. Is this the first professional women's league? No, this is not the first professional women's league. Well, first of all, it's not the first professional women's league. There's been lots of women's leagues in all kinds of other sports. So no, this is not the first. The PWHL is not the first women's professional league in North America. It's not the first women's professional hockey league in North America. It's not the first women's professional hockey league in the world. There have been lots of women's pro leagues, lots of women's hockey pro leagues. Arguably, some have been semi-pro, but this is not the first. Minnesota, the state of hockey, actually is a great example to show that women's hockey history at the semi-pro pro level goes as far back as basically women's hockey in the NCAA and women's hockey in the Olympics, because people like the general manager of PWHL Minnesota, Natalie Darwitz, people like Winnie Brown, now Brown, she's married, but the Brott family in Minnesota. There's just so much history. The Minnesota Whitecaps. Lee Steckline played for the Minnesota Whitecaps. There's some other players here that have played for the Minnesota Whitecaps even before they joined what was the PHF, and prior to it being called the Professional Hockey Federation, it was the National Women's Hockey League. And before the National Women's Hockey League came on the scene in 2015 in the United States and then expanded to Canada, there was the Canadian Women's Hockey League, the CWHL. There's women's hockey leagues in Switzerland. There's women's hockey leagues in Sweden. There are women's hockey leagues in Russia, in Australia, in China now. So no, this is not the first women's professional league. That's for dang sure. The longest standing women's professional league in women's pro sports in the United States is the WNBA, the Women's National Basketball Association. For individual athletes, you have the PGA or the LPGA and WTA, which is golf and tennis respectively. Those two leagues predate the WNBA. And then also you have the NWSL, which is over 10 years strong now. So no, this is not the first women's professional league. It is not the first women's professional hockey league. Hope that answers your question. And I'm sure I missed some, but no, this is not the first. This is not the first time there has been a women's pro hockey team in Minnesota. This is not the first time there's been a women's pro hockey team in Montreal, in Boston, in any of the states in the PWHL. Every one of those, or cities, I guess I should say, every one of those cities / provinces has had a former iteration of women's pro hockey. So again, hope that answers your question. I think it's a great question, and it is a clarification that unfortunately too many are not taking the time to make. There are players in this league. There are players, like I mentioned earlier on the stream. Hillary Knight has played professional hockey in Boston. This is her 3rd time playing pro hockey in Boston. She played for the Boston Blades and won a championship. She played for the Boston Pride and won a championship. And now she's playing for the PWHL Boston. So, love this question. Great question to ask. I'm just a little bit ticked off because, again, people who are answering this question are doing so inaccurately. Who will be the rookie of the year in the PWHL? That's a great question. I mean, a lot of people, of course, are looking at Taylor Heise. And I think this is another thing that's going to be interesting. I am pretty literal when it comes to awards. So I think if it's your rookie year, it's your first year. That's what it means. Now, the thing that's going to be interesting here is that I think they're going to have to differentiate rookie from newcomer, but even that's not really accurate because everyone is new to the PWHL. So I don't know what they're going to do about rookie/newcomer of the year because the PHF, for example, had a newcomer of the year, a player that maybe played professionally in any of the other leagues that I've mentioned that existed prior to this year. And some of them still exist, especially overseas. So there's a difference between someone coming to the PHF for the first time, newcomer, and there's a difference between being a true rookie, as in this league is your first time being a pro athlete. So I don't know, Foster, which one you meant, but excuse me, Taylor Heise fits all categories. She's never played pro hockey. She was the first overall draft pick to Minnesota. So a lot of people have her on that list. I think you can also look at players like Sophie Jakes, who a lot of people are excited to see. I mentioned some goalies earlier, Abstreeter and Emma Soderberg. Technically, have not had pro experience, although they've been with their international teams. You have Alina Mueller, who's playing for Boston. She was going to play in the PHF. She had a contract there. And then when that league was acquired by what is now the PHF, she, of course, was one of the first players signed to the PHF. That's a player to look out for. We just haven't had enough games for me to know who's going to be considered the rookie of the year. If you can help share, Women's Pro Hockey Seattle is doing a PWHL watch party at Rough and Tumble on 120 at 9:30 a.m. That's amazing. I love that. I love Women's Pro Hockey to Seattle. I love Rough and Tumble. And I didn't know that they were doing a watch party. That's amazing. I, around that time, will be calling a women's hockey game at the college level. I was just mentioning that. So sadly, I won't be able to watch along with y'all. But if you want to double dip and watch, who will I be calling? Boston College and Vermont, I think. So you can tell them that if they want to double dip and put on the college game, that I would much appreciate it. But of course, I'm happy to share that. And I'll make sure that that I do so in the weeks coming up. Okay, who do you think might be the rookie of the year coming out of college next year? That's another question I really can't answer because we don't know what the draft process is going to be like. I know someone from our Locked on Kraken Insiders was asking me about that, and there are a few different things. Right now, this is the only pro league in North America, but again, not the only pro option. I would say that who would be considered a top draft pick coming out of the NCAA, especially if they're already on a national team. I know a lot of people have been talking about Kayla Barnes, who it's just wild how much eligibility that she has. But part of that is because she's been on the senior national team since so young. And for those who are not familiar, when you go to an Olympics, for ice hockey, for women's ice hockey, the United States and Canada, they do what's called, depending on the country, either centralization or why did I just forget the other term? Effectively, they are for a few months leading up to the Olympics, it's centralized as a team, as a national team. So because of that, if you're a college student, what a lot of college hockey players, specifically not just a college student, but a college hockey player, what they will do is they'll suspend their eligibility for that year. And so that's how Kayla Barnes has been in the NCAA for a handful of years. And then also, of course, the COVID year, she's a part of those graduation classes that get an extra year because of everything being canceled because of COVID. But Kayla Barnes has to be a top pick. She played at Boston College and then went to the Ohio State University. I actually haven't been able to catch up with what Kayla's been doing at the NCAA level. Been focused a lot on the Kraken, but I'm excited that my attention will turn a little bit to NCAA. And of course, the PWHL, a shot goes in. Good save by Anne-Renee Desbiens. And I think if Minnesota had numbers, they probably could have collected that rebound. It was sitting right there, just no extra numbers there. Here comes Minnesota again, right into the chest. And a few extra, I don't think you can call them love taps, but it's getting a little feisty here, or as I like to say, spicy. What's super important about this league and lost in all of the not talking about either leagues is that this hockey league has a CBA. Okay, yes, this hockey league does have a CBA, and of all of those other women's leagues, including women's ice hockey leagues that I mentioned, yes, they started with a CBA, which is almost unheard of in any pro and at any pros level. NHL, NBA, MLB, that's only on the men's side. They've all had to fight for CBAs while their league already pre-existed. So this CBA predates any games playing. That's a good thing. There are some chinks in the chain, though, for this CBA. It's not even close to the most comprehensive CBA that I have ever read. That being said, when you create a CBA off of a league that doesn't exist, that's part of the give and take of the timeline. I also think that there are literally things in the CBA that are to be determined at a later date. I think, generally speaking, as someone who is always pro-labor, that puts the hands a little bit, or that puts the power a little bit more in the league and team ownership hands than it does the players. But all of that depends on what the relationship between the PA and the league is going to be. It does read right now as something that's more beneficial to the league, but we shall see. I know there were reports of some additional waivers that players were asked to sign, which I think when you come up with a CBA, especially when a CBA has been created before the first puck drop, you really don't want to see those things. But again, because of the timeline for this league, which was super short, there were definitely things that were vague in the CBA. And so it's kind of like, for those familiar with especially US history, it's kind of like the, the Constitution of the United States, where things are left vague and then it's like, ooh, we'll figure that out through states' rights. That's kind of how that CBA feels. So they do have a CBA. So that is a big thing. We've never had a CBA in women's hockey. And as someone who focuses a little bit on sports business, is it the greatest CBA that I've ever seen? No. Is it understandable why it's not? Absolutely. Do I still have questions reading the CBA on what's actually going down? And have there been things that have come up that are not reflected in the CBA? Also, yes. So, yay, CBA. And just like the WNBA, who is expected to opt out of their CBA, and just like any other CBA that's ever existed at any professional sport level for any gender, there's always going to be work to do. So just putting that out there. Do you think any of the PWHL players will get picked up by the NHL? They would have to be a superstar or franchise player. When you say picked up, I'm not exactly sure what you mean, because as far as I understand, I don't know if it's in the CBA. I've never actually read the NHL CBA, but no woman has ever played in the NHL. I also don't think that that's the point of starting this league. I don't, how do I want to say this? I'm of the opinion that men's sports are not and should not always, without question, be considered the gold standard. Certainly when it comes to treatment of women or Black people or gay people, we should not be looking to men's leagues as the top of the top. But that's, maybe a conversation for another day. I don't care if a woman wants to play in the NHL. I don't care if a woman ever plays in the NHL. Me personally, I would rather see women's pro hockey than any other level of hockey. That's my opinion. Um, so I don't know. I think it's more palatable throughout history to see a, a woman play hockey with men when she's a goaltender. We've also seen Angela Ruggiero right here in Tulsa. For those who don't know, I'm coming to you live from Tulsa, Oklahoma. But the Tulsa Oilers have had a pro team here, at the more at the, I guess now, ECHL level. And Angela Ruggiero, who's a massive name in women's hockey, played at the Olympics, is a hockey Hall of Famer. She played hockey for the Oilers alongside her brother, who was here for a little bit. So defenders and goaltenders is what we tend to see. Do I think there are women who could compete and play in the NHL? Uh, it's a tough question to answer right now because the game is officiated differently. I think that there are players. I mean, I cover the Seattle Kraken. The Seattle Kraken is compromised of players who are not known for their physicality, which I think is totally fine. And they have to play hockey a certain way to win games. They play hockey in a way that's familiar to me because of how the women's game traditionally is played, because you can't just put, I mean, you shouldn't do this in men's hockey anyway, but in theory, you should not be, just muscling people around. And right now they're calling a penalty as we speak. But I think there are women who are capable, that certainly have the steel to play and absorb that contact. I think there are women who are certainly fast enough. There are women who are strong enough to compete, maybe not toe to toe with every single NHLer, but they'll figure it out. Steph Curry, we're talking basketball now, but is he the most? He's not even close to one of the strongest NBA players, but nobody questions whether he can be an NBA caliber. So it's not just about strength. You have to talk about skill. Steph Curry is likely not out muscling most of his teammates, let alone most of the NBA and the association. Yet he's an NBA, not only is he an NBA player, he's an NBA champion multiple times over. So it's not about, Lee Steckline has a tall frame. You have other goaltenders who are tall and they have a big frame in net comparative to some other women's ice hockey players. So I don't think it has to just be based on the physicality. And since we're not just basing it on the physicality, are there women who have the skill to play in the NHL? Heck yes. Heck yes. There are NHL players who don't necessarily have NHL caliber skill, but they have NHL caliber physicality, and that's what keeps them in the league. So, do I personally care to see it? No. Do I think it could happen? Physically, is the skill level of a women's hockey player to the level where she could compete in the NHL? I would say yes. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. And that's more because of, it's an indictment not only of our society, but also literally the rules and how things are. Yes, I know that she played in an exhibition game. There have been a few of these kind of like Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, International Women's Day exhibitions. We've seen that before. I know about Mano. I think, again, that's why I mentioned goaltenders. She's not the only goaltender that we've seen play at a men's pro hockey level. Mariah Fujimagari, excuse me. Also, I forget at what level that was, but she's played with men. These things happen, but the palatability is very small, mostly from the white male gaze, GAZE. And so it has to be quote unquote the perfect women's hockey player. She can't be too gay. She can't be too good. She can't be too this. She can't be too that. She has to be perfect, which kind of speaks to what I think a lot of people think about this league. This is the perfect league, but it's not the first league. And it's quote unquote perfect because of how the rest of hockey it's palatable to the rest of hockey. But this is not the first league. We won't know yet if it's the quote unquote best league historically. We have to see how the performances are going to pan out. This is just the league that has caught fire. Does that make it the best? maybe it will, I don't know. But calling it the best with a without it having as many games as some of the other women's leagues that have existed and that do exist. There are still active women's leagues that exist. That burns my grits a little bit. Um Thanks for coming through, Jeff. Enjoy your game. What's important to me is that the union exists, and if the league tries to exploit the players are organized in a position to negotiate and strike if necessary. Well, here's the thing: in their CBA, they can't go on strike, so that's number one. That's actually something that you see a lot in CBAs, which, in my opinion, is counter to that. I mean, they can. I mean, they're not supposed to, but when you get to that level, you're pretty much kind of, you know. But I hear what you're saying. I think that there is value in a CBA existing, but a CBA is only as strong as what's in the CBA. So if you have a CBA that's not comprehensive, then it's not going to protect the players. And arguably, some of that could be by design. So I hear what you're saying, but you're not going to hear me giving what I would consider premature adulation just for a CBA existing. You can ask Billie Jean King this. She is the queen of knowing that the reason you fight for policy is not necessarily because the policy itself is going to be perfect, but the policy, and maybe this is what you're saying, the policy means that it's explicitly written, and when the policy isn't followed, that because of the policy or the CBA following the policy, then you can effectively litigate if you have to. I don't think that there's enough separation between the PWHL PA and the PWHL right now that we're going to see the amount of autonomy that players should enjoy. And I think we've already seen small examples of that. For example, we heard the PA director say that effectively, hey, yeah, we know some players haven't been paid, but let's calm down. It's the first time we're doing this. That's true. This is the first time this league is doing this. And I'm of the opinion that the PA should always argue on behalf of its players getting paid on time. So if there are errors being made, I would hope that a PA would fix those errors, and make accommodations for players who are not being paid because of mistakes that were not made by them, but were made by their employer. That's what I would like a PA to do. But I was raised by a lawyer, and I'm a Black Latina woman. Well, Latina implies woman. So yeah, like Billie Jean King once told me, getting the law on the books is important, and then being able to follow up. But that's hard. That's extremely hard to do. And that should be the job of the PA. Sarah Fillier, I didn't mention Sarah Fillier, but Sarah Fillier, again, one of those college players, and her college career has been interrupted a time or two because of national team, but she has looked fantastic for Princeton. I think had Princeton not had that interruption, it would probably be and I should say COVID interruption. I think the Ohio State University and Princeton were on a really great course to disrupt what we consider the top of the food chain when it comes to NCAA women's hockey. And, all of the Ivy League decided not to play that one additional year. Anyway, I could go on, but yes, I agree with Sarah Fillier. All of that is good. I guess by strike, I mean not renew the CBA. And here's another thing. You can only opt out of your CBA after a certain term. And I have asked the PWHL, I have asked the PWHL PA, I have asked PWHL PA representatives. At least as of a couple of months ago, it's not clear what the opt-out is for this contract. This is an 8-year contract, and there's nothing stipulated in the CBA regarding opt-out, at least last I looked at the CBA. So that's also concerning. So it explicitly says that they cannot go on strike. But the last draft that I saw in the last conversation that I had with people, there's not anything explicitly where you can opt out. But that does exist, for example, in the WNBA CBA, because the WNBA says that the league, the WNBA, or the PA, the WNBPA, has until November of 2024 to opt out of the most current CBA, which expires, if we're going into 2024, it expires 26, something like that. So before the full term of the 8-year contract, let's just say, you have an opportunity to opt out. It's seeming very likely that the WNBA players will want to consider opting out. I mean, Breanna Stewart has already said she wants to opt out. She is one of the player representatives at the executive level, but she, of course, does not make those decisions in a silo. It will go to a vote. So the players will vote on whether they want to opt out. But we don't know what that process looks like right now for the PWHL. And for me, the PWHL is coming at a time where the WNBA CBA is as best as it's ever been. The NWSL CBA, first of all, exists and is one of the best protections that we've ever seen for women's soccer. So to not have that opt out in a league that's starting in 2024 and starts with a CBA or with a players association, that's one of the things that, for me, it's a little bit of a demerit. It's a short, it's not as, that's what I mean. It's not as comprehensive as other CBAs. And so it's a hard argument for me because, yes, this is the first time that this league is running. And what I've said for years is that women's hockey cannot start as if it's starting anew in certain categories, because people like Billie Jean King, people like Venus and Serena Williams, people like Swin Cash and Sue Bird and Nneka Ogwumike, people like Crystal Dunn and Alex Morgan, and so many other people have worked on so many gains for women's sports. There's no reason that a CBA for a new league starting in 2024 shouldn't have an opt-out clause. That's my opinion. Because you should have known better. Opting out is the singular thing that has continued to push the needle and make the WNBA one of the most comprehensive leagues in the world. Full stop. But you got to have an opt-out, because that's your leverage. There's very little leverage right now for PWHL players. Very little leverage. Everything is being run through the league. And some might argue that that's a good thing, because some might argue that's a good thing. I can see that argument. And if you don't put yourself in a position to have real autonomy early on, it's hard. It's always hard to get that power if you don't ask for it up front. Anyway, I know I went on my soapbox, but you're asking great questions. These are all very great. These are good questions. And I don't always have the time to like put them in an article or on social media, but these are things I think about all the time. So I think these are great questions. And yeah, Montreal is a great team. The scoreline is in favor of Minnesota right now, but we'll see what they do. Montreal in the last league, the Premier Hockey Federation, the PHF, was kind of known for surging super late. And they were a team where you didn't know what was happening in the game. It didn't matter how many goals they were down, what the score was. If you had 5 solid minutes left in the game and Montreal was down but within striking distance, you cannot guarantee a win in that game. You have to play hard. And I love that's kind of the identity of Montreal hockey. I think we've seen it in all of the other versions of women's pro hockey, that Montreal is a hockey squad that they're going to play hard. There's like blue collar lunch pail type teams, and then there's just like a level up above that. I don't know how you would classify it, but that's how I feel Montreal plays. having a little snack here. Yeah, I like that you mentioned Fillier. Kayla Barnes has got to be a name up there. I'm trying to think. Let's see. If I look at the NCAA right now, and then it's a thing again with that eligibility. Are some players going to stay? Do they have extra eligibility because they were an Olympian? Those are some things that you have to worry about. So NCAA women's ice hockey. First, let me take a look at the rankings. I haven't taken a look at the rankings in a while. I love that Syracuse is up there. Princeton, again, I think they had their time to really strike. And I don't want to say the window is closing, but it's definitely changing. Colgate having a great year. Clarkson, Dartmouth, Wisconsin, Minnesota always have great teams. The Ohio State University, Quinnipiac, Mercyhurst is a great team. BC always great. BU, Northeastern, Harvard. UConn is an interesting squad. I think they're kind of maybe I'd say mid-major right now. Vermont has been a team that has been pretty solid the last few years, but they're struggling a little bit. Yeah. Wait, hold on. Let me see. I don't want to do individual stats. I don't know why I was just looking at. I was going to say that doesn't make any sense. Let's go to pairwise. It's just a little easier. Yale. There's some programs that as you see and learn about the players that are playing pro, you'll start to learn that there's just some teams that, again, they've had because it's the same pioneers. For example, for Ottawa, yes. For Ottawa, you have Katarzyna Mrazova. Katarzyna Mrazova has played in the CWHL, the NWHL. She's now playing in the PWHL. She's played overseas. She's played in the Olympics, World Championships, NCAA. And because of her age and where women's hockey has been, she's effectively been a pioneer of every league, especially in North America, that has ever existed for women's hockey. And so when we say things like, oh, newcomers and best of best, all coming from the US and Canada, these Olympians on the US and Canada have always played alongside people who aren't on the national team and who aren't even on the US or Canadian national teams. They've always played against and alongside elite level players that don't make an Olympic roster and or make an Olympic roster for a team that's not in North America. So the conversation when we have it about women's hockey, and it seems so singular to only players who are actively on the US roster or on the Canadian roster, that really burns my grits because it is an erasure of someone like Katarzyna Mrazova or Janine Weber, or even some of the goaltenders that I've mentioned before. Alina Mueller, a lot of people think will be great at the pro level. And if all we ever talk about are US and Canadian Olympians, then we are missing so much of what makes women's hockey so exciting and why people like me argue that it's never been the talent that's been the issue. If you want to arbitrarily set a league to only have 6 teams, sure. Of course, they're going to be very competitive teams because the pool of women's hockey players is much wider than what can fit on only a 6-team roster. And effectively, when the PWHL bought out the PHF and the PWHPA stopped operating, we went from 12 or 13 pro teams and pro opportunities to only 6. So it's cut in half. We cut the pool at the pro level in North America, at least, in half, which then has made competition overseas a lot different. So again, I could go into this for days. These are things that are harder to put in articles. They're harder to put on social media, but that's why I like doing live streams, because I can really get into it. Thank you so much, Mike. I hope I make sense. I feel like I'm just going super fast, but there's so much in here. And I'm maybe more conscious than I wish I was about the fact that some people see me as a PHF person. And so anything that I say that's critical to women's hockey, I feel is going to be perceived as negative criticism to the PWHL, which is not how I intend it. I'm being critical of women's hockey because I know women's hockey history. And I said a lot of these things for the last few years. Some of you have been following me for a while, and you probably have heard me say some of these things because women's hockey deserves to be beyond some of these problems. But when we start and stop and start and stop, it's that I've been watching a lot of Amazing Race. I've never watched Amazing Race before 2023. So like all these years of racers that are in like, I didn't know any of that. Anyway, on The Amazing Race, if you've ever watched it, let me know in the comments. But if you watch The Amazing Race, the US version, I know there's other ones. But anyway, you watch The Amazing Race, and there inevitably comes a time where there's one person or several people that don't know how to drive manual. They only know how to drive automatic. And so their race is interrupted by the start and stop, and trying to figure out the clutch. That's what it feels like for women's hockey. So people are saying this, I can't believe this is the attendance. I do believe. I'm not surprised that we have a 12K plus sellout for the Minnesota's home game. I'm not surprised by that. The reason that it's a record, and again, I use air quotes because I'm so frustrated because one of the things that I pushed for in the NWHL/PHF was to publicize attendance data. There have been times in women's sports history where we don't report things because we think it'll look bad, but it needs to be reported so that we have an accurate history. Of course, a first-year women's hockey league the attendance is going to look different than year 100 plus for the NHL. Of course it's going to look different, but that doesn't mean it's bad. And the only way to know if we've grown is by releasing, no pun intended, on the Locked On Kraken stream, by releasing the data. So then you have a benchmark number. So again, we're talking about these numbers, and this is the biggest crowd here, and this is the biggest crowd here under these circumstances. It sometimes feels like, for Locked On Kraken listeners, you know this, but there were times where people would say in season 1 that the Seattle Kraken had really great defensive metrics. And I'm like, excuse me? Eye test tells me, hell no, that's not true. And it's like, well, our defense is really good when this, and this is happening. What? When do you ever have all of those things happening at the same time? Just like, anyway, I know I went on like another tangent, but this stuff is important. It's super important. And I do believe this is one of the biggest crowds. But again, going back to the Locked On Kraken, or any people watching who usually listen and or watch me on Locked On Kraken, you know that one of the big numbers for women's ice hockey was actually at Climate Pledge Arena. The rivalry series had its biggest attendance numbers in a quote-unquote non-traditional hockey market that has never had women's pro hockey. Now, there's been women's hockey in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest, and I know some of those groups, whether they're trying to bring women's pro hockey there, whether they're sharing women's hockey history, whether it's at the amateur level or, some rec leagues and stuff like that, or even affinity and affiliation between women's hockey and men's hockey teams like the Seattle Metropolitans. We're going back to the early 1900s. All of that exists. But anyway, my point in saying that is, so a city that just got an NHL hockey team, that has no women's pro hockey, that doesn't even have a women's a well-known and a well-known women's hockey program competing for an NCAA title, they gave us the biggest crowd on record for the rivalry series. So why would I be surprised that Minnesota and Montreal before them have 10K plus people at a women's hockey? Why would I be surprised? If you know the history, there's no way you're surprised. If anything, you know that some of these crowds are actually arbitrarily suppressed because they're like, well, we're only going to sell lower bowl, or we're only going to sell one side. So then when the camera zooms on the ice, it looks full. Just a little sidebar. What those people didn't anticipate, at least in Boston, is that when you have the crowd on one side and you don't feel the other, and I could tell, and maybe it's just because I know women's hockey people and I know what how a broadcast works, but on the empty side, you could tell it was like league or team personnel, almost like scouts, but you could see the scouts in the camera angle because when the camera pulled out for a wide angle, you see the empty seats. So, there are all these things that have been arbitrarily done to make the numbers that actually are reported, because they're not always, per my previous rant. I've gone on like 3 rants in the last 5-10 minutes. They arbitrarily set the bar so low for women's hockey, for women's sports. We're seeing that in literally every women's sport. Women's sports went up 100, 200, 400x viewership, not attendance, obviously, but viewership numbers went up. And some of that, yes, people who couldn't attend a game who normally would, they were now watching. So you have to vary that, that's a variable, but not to the point where you're literally 400xing in the case of the NWSL, their viewership. Why also do I think viewership went up during 2020 is because for the first time, ESPN and CBS, I work with them now, and all these other companies, they weren't arbitrarily setting the broadcasts to some really super low number. We saw more broadcast windows for women's sports in 2020, and women's sports viewership didn't stay the same. It didn't fall, which is exactly what happened on the men's side. It skyrocketed. And since then, those leagues have been able to parlay those into bigger broadcast windows, because now these broadcasters who thought like, oh, I'm just doing this because, I'm a girl dad. I'm a girl dad. So I'm an executive and a girl dad. So I'm going to put women's, girls hockey for all the little girls around North America to watch. And I'm being a little silly and, I'm being a little extra, but these are the things that you don't have to, I'm not making this up. We hear them even on these broadcasts, grown men saying, well, my daughter this and my granddaughter that. And you know what? That's amazing. My dad only had daughters. And it was very special to him eventually. But anyway, I'm not going to get into that. The point is that this is language that we hear constantly in women's sports. And so this surprise that we get when women's sports are successful, when all those arbitrary barriers have been thrown away, it's aggravating, because it's not that we were unsuccessful because the sport is not watchable. We had so many things that were arbitrarily changed because of the assumption, mostly by men, that we couldn't meet a certain expectation. But we don't know the limits and the capacities of women's sports, generally speaking, because we've never been set up to hit a ceiling. We're always working at the basement level, and sometimes just a hair underneath. Sometimes they actually make us work below basement level, as Minnesota just scores. Haven't watched The Amazing Race, but that's an interesting analogy. Yeah, I mean, like if you can drive an automatic and then all of a sudden now you're having to change gears because you have to do an extra step, there's literally a jerk stop that happens when you don't know that. And yes, that's how I feel, especially women's hockey. That's what I feel about women's hockey. We're, whomever's been given the keys to women's hockey is putting us now from an automatic, hybrid car that runs like a dream with all of our preset stations. Now that every 5 to 7 years we're given a new car with a new uh a new system that we have to learn. And of course that's going to have this stop start effect, and sometimes you lose people along the way. So, anyway, hey, I do remember you, Maddie, and I saw your comment on Locked on NHL. Thanks so much for stopping by. I'm so glad that you stopped by, and we hopefully will do a little bit more of these. I have reached the limitations of my creativity on the score bug here. Also, I just started randomly talking about things, but shots on goal, oh my goodness, they have them listed as 21-13, but Minnesota up 2-0 on Montreal, which is wild. No pun intended, because we're in Minnesota. Minnesota now on a power play. Denisha Krishova on the power play unit. Just, such a fantastic player. She really can create on her own. And I want to see again who she's paired with, because sometimes it's hard for a player that's so used to having to create their own shot when they have highly skilled players on their line. Sometimes they struggle. And so you really need, with Denisha Krishova, actually, I have the lines. I can just look it up. I'm curious to see who they have her with, because I saw that as some of the issue when she played in the PHF for the Minnesota team. And it took Minnesota a really long time to make some line changes. But when they did, and it was controversial, I don't know how many of you remember that. I'm happy to get into it, because why not? I've ranted about everything else. But it was a little bit controversial. For those of you who know my Locked on Kraken coverage, I really try to save criticism for the coaches until I feel it's inevitable. Like there's absolutely no other explanation. And it was getting there to the Minnesota team. And I asked the Minnesota coach at the time, Rhonda Engelhart, and she said, well, it's funny you asked, Erica, because, I'm on the broadcast, so I'd speak to her before all of her games. And she said at the time that actually the GMs for the PWHL, for the PHF team, the Minnesota Whitecaps, she said, yeah, we will see changes to the roster. And she effectively said that they weren't her changes and that the changes were coming from above her. So that was really interesting. I really enjoyed Rhonda. She ended up getting let go before the PHF was effectively acquired by the PWHL. So they were going to make a coaching change anyway. But that was very telling. One, I mean, selfishly, that my eye test was accurate. It just, you could tell they were stagnant. To go back to a car reference, they were stalled out. They just couldn't go forward unless they made some changes. And it seems like the front office finally got there as well. But yeah, very interesting. Oh, that was an interesting season. Minnesota was effectively imploding. The Minnesota Whitecaps, they lost like 8 games straight and still found a way to make the playoffs. Not great, in my opinion, but when you have a small league, all you got to do is get, what's needed you get to advance. And they did. And they played very well against Boston in the semis, but they get to the final. They take Toronto to overtime in that final. It was exciting. That was an exciting year, but very, very, I was always scratching my head when it came to Minnesota. So anyway, I went on a rant and I forgot what I was supposed to look up. Oh, I wanted to look up the lines. So Krishova, oh, exactly. Okay. I didn't remember this, but I said it at the top of the show. Denisa Krishova, who plays for the Team Czechia, has played for the Whitecaps. She played for also the Boston Pride in the PHF. She's on the line, the top line with Taylor Heisey and Kendall Coyne-Schofield. So that tells you a little bit about what they think of Denisha Krishova. She individually, just can make a play. But now she's with Coyne-Schofield and Heisey, who are very well known for their tenacity and for their skating speed. Yeah, so I like that. I like that a lot. A lot. Okay, what do we got going on here? We're at the 14-3, let's just say the 14-30 mark here in the third period. Minnesota up 2-0 on Montreal. Montreal has shots on goal 21, favored in shots on goal 21-13. 2 goals on 13 shots. I believe that's what they call efficient. Whereas you like that Montreal, in a vacuum, you like to see a lot of shots on goal. But the fact that Montreal's having to shoot more for less impact on the final score, it's just something to keep in mind. And now we have an opportunity for Minnesota. Oh, my goodness. I did not think they were going to pass that up. Who is that? That's that top line. I was just talking about their speed. I think maybe an extra pass. I'm not sure I would have tried to pass that off. But oh my gosh, I literally was just talking about this line and how they create. Oh my gosh. That was Krishova, right? I don't know how she got that pass over. Oh my gosh. That's a lethal line. Kendall Coyne Schofield coming off having her first child, and so hasn't played with the national team, didn't play with the PWHPA in its last leg, but getting back her strength and speed. I've said this a time or two before on podcasts. I think it's important to understand that having a child is like coming back from an injury for some people, I should say. Arguably, I don't know what Kendall's situation is, but whether it's natural birth or C-section, your body physically changed in the same way as breaking a bone or recovering from a laceration. In some people's case, it's both at the same time on top of other things. So it is, I think what's important and what I feel gets missed when we talk about women coming back from pregnancy is not because, oh my God, she was a skater and now she's a mom. I mean, that's true. And it's like coming back from an injury. It's like coming back from a serious injury. So that's as miraculous as it's like coming back. Let's say Andre Burakovsky. He had a groin injury. He aggravated it as he was on his way back before the playoffs, missed the playoffs, right? It's like coming back from an injury and then all of a sudden being responsible for a child, which actually some NHL players have also done. But the difference is that the NHL players, I know of no NHL player, because women don't do that. People with uteruses are not playing in the NHL consistently. I know of no NHL player who has come back from an injury, is rehabbing an injury, has a newborn, and was the person who like literally pushed that child into the world. That doesn't exist. But that's essentially what Kendall Coyne Schofield is doing. And for her to get her step back and to be on that top line with Denisha Krishova, who not only is fast, but is like, I don't even like, she crashes the net. It's almost scary. It's almost scary to watch, let alone to be defending. I can't even imagine. And Taylor Heisey, so exciting. So you got that. Yes, the women's hockey podcast that I have is called the Founding Four Podcast as a part of Black Rosie Media. This podcast where I'm testing out the score bug, although I've kind of let that go. But this is the Locked On Kraken podcast where I cover the Seattle Kraken. And we dabble, of course, like right now in women's hockey. But thanks so much, Maddie. It is good to see you again. Attendance, 13,316. So they even beat the 12. At the start of today, they were expecting 12K, which is more than what we saw in Montreal when they hosted Ottawa. And you're right. I don't know why I thought Ottawa. You know what? I sometimes forget that Katarzyna Mrazova is on the Ottawa team, not on the Montreal team, because Montreal has a few Czechia players. They're so good. Oh, so good. Okay, power play here for Minnesota. 13:04 left here in the game. This has been some solid hockey. I think these two teams are matched up pretty well. There goes Krishova. Oh, can't keep the zone. Montreal looking for a shorty over here. Oh my gosh, what good stick play by Stacy. Laura Stacy, oh my. Just killing off time at minimum, but even better. Ottawa hosted Montreal. Okay. I do, Mike. That's true. We have the segment, women's hockey segment. It's bi-weekly on Locked On NHL. So every other Friday. So it wasn't this Friday, it wasn't yesterday, but it will be next week. And I join Rachel and Gil on the Locked On NHL show. I really would love, if you're listening here and you liked what we've talked about, make sure you do watch the Locked On NHL bi-weekly women's hockey segment, because I'm making a case, especially now that the PWHL is finally here, to make that longer than just every other week for like 7 to 12 minutes. I think we can do a lot more with our coverage more consistently. And the Locked On show is unlike a lot of other podcasts just in general, where we go Monday through Friday. So I think we can make it fit. It'd be even better, in my opinion, if we do like we do for Locked On Women's Basketball, which is where I started, and we had a whole show dedicated. But right now it's one segment of one day's episode every other Friday. So let's see if we can do better. But it starts by getting those numbers up. And then, like I said, the difference between starting at the ceiling and starting at the basement. I'm just saying. Yes, it was Ottawa with the previous record. So I misspoke. You're right. I knew it was in Canada. But Montreal, that's right. They have their opener. It's late. Let me look it up, but I remember seeing it's super late. It's already sold out, but it's super late. They have their opener. Oh, on the 13th. I thought, okay, the 13th, and then they're at, so Montreal, similar to what we saw for the Montreal Force, they have a few places that they're playing. So I don't know. I think Bell Place probably has the larger capacity than Verdun Auditorium. So Ottawa had that game. I don't know. I keep messing that up. But thank you for correcting me. Thanks, Maddie. I hope everyone takes a listen. I appreciate it. And again, we're trying to make a case to grow women's hockey coverage. There is a Locked On Women's Basketball show. I actually helped get that show going on YouTube. That was before the whole channel or the whole network integrated over to YouTube. And now they've got 3,000 followers. I don't work with Locked On Women's Basketball anymore, but that's how I know that there is a model, and the growth model, because of the growth model we see for women's sports, it's so great. So now that we're seeing some data from this league, I'm hoping that will make a case for the company to give us a show sooner rather than later. I mean, these are really great viewership numbers for its first season. About 9:30 left here. Montreal, who's had their foot on the gas, can't find the back of the net. Let me know what questions you have for me regarding women's hockey, regarding the Kraken. Got some interesting decisions to make regarding projected lines. Ooh, big hit. But some of those hits would not necessarily be allowed under IIHF rules. No open ice hits, but they're showing a little bit more allowance for physicality. As I speak, we get a whistle. There's Leah Lum. Won a championship with the Toronto Six, the last ever Isabel Cup, as far as we know. And that's Lum on Krishova. Liam, I'm a smart player. Like a good glue player, I would say. All right, I'm going to get rid of this because I'm not really using the score bug. How are the Kraken doing this season? I have to catch up. Well, it's a great question to ask now. They're doing a lot better than they were earlier on in the season. On a winning streak right now. What are we up to? 7 games? Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. I told you numbers are hard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games. And how many consecutive games with points? So if it's 6, why does it feel like more than 6? I don't know. So 6, 7, 8 or 9 game point streak. I forget. But we're doing well. 10 games. There we go. I couldn't remember it because the LA Kings, right, got the win against Chicago, lost to LA, but then got points against Dallas, LA, Anaheim, Calgary, Philadelphia. Vegas, beat Vegas at the Winter Classic. That was awesome. And then just beat Ottawa. Thank you, Striatic. I couldn't remember. And I usually put the scores. I'm looking over here. You can see my Maddie Beniers poster. I used to have the schedule up here. Actually, I had the Defend the Deep poster, but it kept falling. We were not defending the deep very well, and my poster knew it. So now I have this blank space. I didn't even bother putting that poster back up. We've been on our point streak since that poster fell, maybe a little bit before. But anyway, I also have, similarly to here, I have another door and the schedules here. And then what I do is I write the wins, losses on the schedule. So that's why I was counting over here. But yeah, anyway. 10 games. There you go. 10 games with a point streak. They're doing a lot better. Joey the Cord, I think, has been great for us. I didn't get into this, but Andre Burakovsky also back healthy for us. That's been a good thing. He scored his first goal this season. I thought it was hilarious, although I also had this fear. So he scores. It's just a gritty goal, and he goes into the boards. And I remember seeing that, and I was like, oh, gosh, please tell me he's okay, because he's already been on IR twice this year. And I was like, please be okay. Please be okay. And he kind of joked around about that as well. Although I'm not sure it was really that much of a joke. He's like genuinely concerned that he'll get hurt again. Poor thing. Minnesota looking good late. I've said Montreal traditionally is a team where you got to watch them. Ooh, lost an edge. Did Minnesota. Who was that? No, it wasn't Krishova. Who was that? I haven't committed all of the numbers to memory, and some of them are different than the last time I saw them play. So I've got to keep an eye out for that. But yeah, to answer your question, the Kraken right now are doing solid in a wild card position. So in playoff position right now. They're going to go on a 2-week road trip. I should be able to catch the Kraken when they're at MSG, which I think would be great. Hey Patrick, which day of the week is your bi-weekly Locked On segment? So the bi-weekly Locked On NHL women's hockey segment is on the Friday show. So every other Friday on the Locked On NHL show, you'll hear me. So let me just backtrack. Locked On NHL has multiple hosts Monday through Friday. The Friday hosts every Friday are Gil Martin and Rachel Donner. Gil is the host of the Locked On Islanders show, and Rachel is one of the hosts of the Locked On Flyers show. So you'll hear them every Friday regardless. Every other Friday. So this Friday, you would have heard Gil and Rachel speaking. This coming Friday, which is, let me look at the dates, Friday, January 12th. On January 12th, you'll hear Gil and Rachel and me. And that's where you'll hear the women's hockey segment. So not this past Friday, or not the most recent Locked On NHL Friday show, but next week on January 12th, that's the next time. But if you go to the 29th of December, the December 29th show, I spoke to Gil and Rachel, and we were talking about puck drop for this league. So if you go back 2 Fridays or yeah, 2 Friday shows ago, you'll hear Rachel and Gil. But the great thing is, if you subscribe or if you don't want to, I can actually pull this up for you. But there is a women's hockey playlist. And the great thing about the playlist is I'm going to put the link in here for you because I'm going to enter YouTube as Locked On NHL real quick because I'm one of the hosts there. And if you go to our show or our show channel, you can look at the playlists, and there's a whole playlist for the women's hockey segment. So if you're familiar with the Locked On formula, we have 3 segments in one show. In a 30-minute show, there's traditionally 3 segments. Every other Friday, one of the 3 segments is the women's hockey spotlight. What we also do, though, is we have a playlist that plays the 7 to 12 minutes of the women's hockey show or the women's hockey segment as a part of the bigger show. So there's a whole playlist. I'm going to pull this up for you right now. So if you want to see what our women's hockey coverage has looked like historically versus what it looks like now, you can check it out. But yeah, that's what I'm gonna put it in the chat as soon as I can find it because I'm too busy talking. Now I've gotta look for this. Olympic Hockey Daily, we did that. I did some of that, which was cool. Yeah, so here we go. I'm gonna share this with you in the stream, and this should take you to all of the segments that we've had or any show that we tag as women's hockey, because I started doing some of this while I was in Beijing with Rachel, actually, and Ann Kimmel, who comes on Locked On Kraken a lot. And what we would do is I did a recap of not just women's hockey, actually, but I did a recap of the Olympics. But we talked about women's hockey because the women's tournament started first, and that kind of got things rolling. We had another host who did a little women's hockey talk during World Championships, but he's not with the network anymore. So you'll see all of that in there. Yeah, you can definitely tell Montreal is getting frustrated. That's also something that they're known for. But, this is a Minnesota team. I kind of said they went on that skid, and I know it's not the same team. The rosters are not the same. But what I always think is interesting across sports is that some cities, they have a personality that seems to permeate into their sports teams. And I think we see that in women's hockey. Minnesota has a type. Montreal has a type. Boston has a type. The New York, Connecticut, New Jersey tri-state team has a type. Western New York, there's no Buffalo team in the PWHL, at least not right now, but we've seen Buffalo in the past, has a type. So when I say that, I'm a little bit referring to the city and not necessarily this league. Because we don't have enough games yet. But right now, early returns tell me that this is a Minnesota team that can almost rope-a-dope you, which is they might look sloppy early on. You're going to get your licks in early on, but they can take those hits. They can take the hits. And when they see their opportunity, hence what I said about shots on goal, which are almost even now. But they have 20 shots, and they had, 12 earlier? And they had already had their 2 goals. So, Oh, it's Megan. What's going on? And you mentioned this as well. There are also some women's hockey players who, once the game is at a certain way and at a certain time, you'll kind of notice that they'll get a little feisty. That's not just women's hockey, right? Carson Soucy, I'm obviously talking about the Kraken right now, but Carson Soucy, formerly with us, Vince Dunn, there's just some guys that a certain situation, if we're not playing well or if it's a little tighter than they want it to be, you can almost expect that they will, they might let the emotions get to them. Will Borgen can be that way, I think. A lot of people so many people like Will Borgen that I think he gets away with some things that other players don't necessarily. I talked about that on the show once. Hey, that's Kraken hockey, baby. I love that graphic. Uppercut. Absolutely. You got to do what you got to do. But just know that there's a consequence to every action. And sometimes when you go overboard, you can hurt your team before you help them. And that's that difference between being level headed. Sometimes, for example, you do have to take a penalty, and it's not going to be, your team's going to be at a disadvantage. But if you don't take that penalty, something bad could happen, such as you expose your goaltender and you are down another goal. So it's that gamesmanship, as I like to say, knowing when to kind of double dutch between that. Thank you. For sure. Yeah, I've been working on it. I think you're talking about the backdrop, which is very different than it was for the playoffs last year. And I've got some winter classic stuff that I haven't even put up yet. So we're working on it. I'm actually going to be on the road for about as long as the Kraken, actually. And I'm only going to one Kraken game, but I'm going to be on the road for about 2, almost 3 weeks, depending on if I stay up there before I make a trip to Toronto. So we won't be seeing this beautiful backdrop for a while. I think what I'm going to do is like take a still shot and then, put it as my background. Erica, can you explain when and why teams leave goals open? Okay, so in hockey, this is known as pulling the goalie. You can see right now that Montreal has an empty net. You can have 6 players on the ice total. A lot of times when we talk in hockey, we talk about having 5 skaters on the ice, and it's not like the goaltender isn't counted, but technically you can have 6 representatives from your team on the ice during what's considered even strength, like right now. But you don't always. Oh, it hit the post. Oh, it hit the post. I'm sorry. I'll get back to you in a minute, Megan. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I'm sure it's so loud. I have the volume turned down because I'm doing a live stream. Oh, another chance. Oh, there it is. Empty net goal. Exactly. So what they'll do is, instead of having 5 skaters and a goaltender, you can have 6 skaters outright. And you want to do that. Zumwinkle scores again, so that's a brace for her. You want to have, or she had another goal. She had all 3 goals. I did not realize Grace Zumwinkle scored the second goal. I didn't realize that. Again, I'm not listening on audio, and I don't have the stats pulled up right now. I did not realize Grace Zumwinkle got the second goal. But anyway, Megan, just to close this up real quick, instead of having a goaltender, if you are losing and it's late in the game, you might want to put an extra attacker on the ice in the hopes that you can get more offense. You literally have more offensive players, but the other side of that is what we just saw, an empty net goal. So Grace Zumwinkle has the first hat trick in PWHL history, certainly for PWHL Minnesota. So yeah. What do you think will happen when Grubauer is back and healthy? Yeah, probably. I don't see the Seattle Kraken getting rid of Philip Grubauer. I don't think Joey Daccord deserves to go down or back to Coachella Valley. And I think if we put him on waivers, which I believe he would go on waivers, right? We can't just send him back. We would lose him. So, because Joey's been on waivers before with us. There's only so many times, and this is one of those things where I always get confused between the different sports that I cover, how it works. But I don't think I don't want us to get rid of Joey. That's a personal want of mine. Do I think it's going to happen? I also don't think it's going to happen the way he's been playing. I just don't think it's going to happen. Philip Grubauer is back and healthy. He's still our presumptive number 1, and he's getting paid the most. So you're not going to want that salary sitting on the bench. So yeah, I do think it's Chris Driedger that goes back, but like, how can that be a long-term solution? Because then you have all that money for his contract, which when is he a free agent? I gotta pull up. We're gonna have to talk about this on the show because now I'm not remembering. We talked about the contracts so much in the off season. It's wild that I can't remember right now when the goaltenders are free agents. But Drieger's terms weren't as long as Grubauer's. I'm pretty sure of that. Anyway, I'll have to take another look. I don't know what the long-term solution is, but I think it's keeping Decord. Either way, I think Decord should stay with the Seattle Kraken. That's my thought. Those are my thoughts. Firebirds still have LaFontaine. I like LaFontaine. I said in the offseason when I saw that he was with us, I was very curious to see what he's going to do. We're about at the 1 minute mark here. Montreal's still looking for a goal. It is after this season for Drieger. I thought so. I just couldn't remember. Okay, that's what you're both saying. I believe you. And that's what I thought I remembered. Because I know we talked about this so much in the offseason. Because I felt, I don't know if I expressed this, but the way Joey was playing in Coachella Valley, I just felt like he deserved a better look than what I thought he got last year. And he took the opportunity and ran with it this year. I'm so proud. Like I don't know the guy. I've interviewed him a few times. He's always super nice, as some of you who are a part of the insiders know, because of the one-on-ones that I've had with him. Super nice, always respectful. I'm just like proud of him. I think Joey D's done a good job. I hope he stays with us. Either way, I wanna see nice things happen for him. Decord after next season. Yes, this is Chris's. That's what I thought. I just couldn't remember for sure. My heart is with 60. It's not easy. I don't envy. And there we go. Minnesota breaks the streak of PWHL teams losing their home opener. All the goals. Grace Zumwinkle. All of the saves. Maddie Rooney. What a time. What a time. I also like that Minnesota is purple. That's like the color right now that the league is using, but we've been told that this is a temporary logo. I mean, there's a lot of things about the brand that apparently are temporary for the PWHL. I hope Minnesota keeps the purple. I like it. Purple rain. I mean, I know the Vikings. I'm not a big football person, but yeah, I like the purple. I like it. There goes a Whitecaps jersey. They're not showing it, which I think is interesting. But that was a Whitecaps jersey someone was wearing. I can tell. Grace Zumwinkle. Okay. Yeah, we got to figure out goaltending. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. Or do you just say it's a wash and like just bring in a lot of other people? I like Jack LaFontaine. I think Coachella Valley should be more worried about its goaltending than the Seattle Kraken. Ooh. And so, excuse me as I drop my chips. I don't know what we're going to do. But Joey Decord has played better than sending him, just assuming we're sending him back to Coachella Valley. I don't think that's an assumption anymore. Chris Drieger had one really good game. And of course, you're worried about having that amount of salary on an AHL roster. But can Jack LaFontaine carry the team? Either way, you still, I actually, it's, we've been talking about him. The other goaltender, I'm forgetting his name right now. Last name starts with an S. Stedska, right? Did I get that right? I think it's Stedska, right? It's been tough. It's been tough go for him. No, he's not. I like Jack, and he's not. He's not NHL yet. NHL, or excuse me, Jack works for the AHL. But remember, Jack LaFontaine didn't start. Well, technically, I guess he did start with the Coachella Valley Firebirds, but then he was sent to the Mavericks. And then when Drieger was brought up the first time, when Drieger was brought up the first time, LaFontaine stayed with the Mavericks. But then since Drieger's been up, LaFontaine has been with the Firebirds. The Firebirds, except for when they had Decord and Drieger, have not had, from my eye test, they haven't had two solid goaltenders. And so you have to figure that out. But at whose expense? Like, on what side of the pipeline are you going to start? I mean, I just don't think somebody's going. I don't know if that's a trade. I don't know if they walk in free agency. I don't know what the situation is, but we have arguably we have three NHL quality goaltenders and only two spots at the NHL. And so somebody's got to go because they're too good. The three of them are too good to, I don't want to say waste starts, but they're too good to accumulate starts in the AHL. That's my opinion. Even with Drieger, even though we haven't seen him in a while, that's my opinion. So you've got three NHL caliber goaltenders and only two spots. So what's going to give? And when do you make that decision? Like, does Drieger want to spend the rest of the year in the AHL? Probably not, right? I mean, I don't know. It is Stetska. That's okay. Stetska, right? Yeah, I can't remember his first name right now, but Stetska. Yeah. You got to figure it out. So that's what Ron Francis and company have to do. I do not envy that choice at all. The fan base is going to be wounded regardless. As much as people talk crap about Grubauer, did you watch the playoffs or not? Did you watch the playoffs or not? How can you be excited that the Seattle Kraken made the playoffs last season and not put some respect on Philip Grubauer's name? I mean, people do it. I just don't understand. I don't understand. And I'm with you. The frustration behind Philip Grubauer and why, for the life of me, I cannot figure out. And I am probably being nicer than I usually am on things, but that's because I genuinely have not figured out how I feel and what I perceive to be the problem when Philip Grubauer is in net comparative to when other people are. And this isn't even talking about Joey Decord. This isn't even talking about Chris Drieger. Martin Jones arguably was our best goaltender in the regular season last year. And he was a stranger off the street. As in, like, he wasn't with the team before. I know he's played in the NHL. But my point is, like, he didn't come in the expansion draft. He didn't come from Coachella Valley. He wasn't with the franchise. And then he shows up and he is the most important player for us for a long stretch of time. Was he the best player? Was he the most impactful player? Was he the most charismatic player? Probably no. On any given night in any of those categories. But was he the most important player for the Kraken, especially during those winning streaks? Yes. Yes, he was. If you say anything else, you're a hater. Yes, he was. He was the most important person on the team until it became McCann, until it became Dunn, until it became Philip Grubauer. The most important person on last year's Kraken team was Martin Jones, which is why I am gutted that nobody talked to him during exit interviews. He is key to understanding last year's Kraken team. Just as, at least right now, Joey Decord is the most important and impactful player for the Seattle Kraken. And I said that, and someone was like, I'm hating on Andre Burakovsky. He's back. He's going to be great for us. When he's healthy, he's great. And we haven't seen him healthy for very long. So I can't say in good conscience. So we're on a 10-game point streak. Andre Burakovsky played in the game against Philadelphia. So that's Philadelphia, Vegas, and Ottawa. So that's 3 out of 10 games with points. 3 of them. And only in one of those games did Burakovsky score a goal. I'm just talking a goal because I thought he had an assist. I can't remember when. He has 1 goal. So at least 1 point, maybe 2. Now my mind is getting fuzzy. So to say that Burakovsky is a more important player in the last 10 games than Decord? No, you cannot say that. The math does not math. I told you I'm afraid of numbers. So unless you tell me a different way to look at those numbers, looking at the regular, pretty basic numbers, I don't know how you make an argument that Burakovsky more important to the Seattle Kraken on their current winning streak than Joey Decord. I don't know how you say that. Just say you prefer Andre Burakovsky, but don't hate on Joey Decord. You can't do that. Where did Martin Jones come from? He was signed because Drieger got hurt and we knew we were going to need extra backup. That's why, and he signed a 1-year contract. That's Jones came from. Oh, wow. Ooh. Where did he come from? Now that's a good question. I want to say it's a team with red. Something about red is coming into my mind. That's very random, I know, and not helpful at all. But I know he played in San Jose. He's with Toronto now. Where did he come? Is it Florida? That sounds possible. Well, because I said red, but it also sounds wrong. I can't remember. But yeah. Was I not specific enough? Did I not give enough examples? I'm sorry. I'll do better next time. Philly. Okay. Orange is not red. And I knew Florida didn't sound right. Okay. Thank you. I was like, ooh, Philly. Yeah. Interesting. He came from Philly. Okay. Red. I don't know why red kept coming in. Ooh, gritty. I'm not a gritty fan. I'm really not. Not just because I adore Bowie. Bowie still kind of freaks me out, but I've already talked about this on the show. I don't like mascots. So they're not for me. Like mascots are not, I'm not the demographic that they're trying to hit with mascots. At least I think mascots are supposed to be for children, but maybe Gritty's changing that. I don't know. It's very strange. I mean, I said in my mind that's what was standing out, but I knew that it was probably not right. That's just all that was coming to me at the time. It didn't feel right. You probably heard that. I was like, this doesn't feel right. I knew it wasn't Ottawa. So if we talk about teams that have red, I knew it wasn't Washington. I knew it wasn't Ottawa. The only other team that I could think of that has red was Florida, but even I was like, that's not right. I couldn't picture it. But also, like, it's not like a New York Metropolitan's orange. It's kind of a grungy, almost like a burnt orange. It's not a great orange as far as oranges go, in my opinion. I don't know what the hex color is, but I don't know. New Jersey, right? New Jersey also has red. I have a Devil's puck right there as well. I knew it wasn't the Devils. I knew for sure it wasn't the Devils. Who else wears red? We have a red eye, red glare. Who else wears red? I'm going to go through all the teams. Not Vancouver, not Edmonton. They also have orange, though. Anyway, I feel like we've done a lot on this live stream. Thank you so much. Bowie and Gritty are besties? Really? Because they're they're like the new kids. Is that a new kids thing? I don't like Gritty. I've never liked Gritty. I don't get Gritty. I don't need Gritty. That's just me. Red Wings. There we go. Red. Yes, exactly. We have red. The Red Wings. I knew he didn't come from Detroit. Like I knew there was a list of teams that he absolutely did not come from. He did not come from the Pacific Division, at least not to us. Philly, yes. Now it's coming back to me. It's coming back to me now. Anyway, I feel like we did a lot. Thank you for joining me. I want to do something like this again. I played around with the score bug early in the stream. There are some things that I still need to figure out. Most of that's on the configuration on my end, but I think it'll get the job accomplished. But I do want to do more PWHL live streams where we can kind of chat it up. I get my reps in, you get to ask questions. We obviously will talk about the Seattle Kraken. But yeah, I think the Wild do have some red. The Wilds have so many colors. I think I love that for them. But let's do this again. So this is the Locked on Kraken channel. You can also check out Black Rosie Media. That's where the Founding Four podcast lives. The Founding Four podcast was named from one of the previous leagues, and it started with 4 teams. But we said, hey, we're still covering women's hockey. We want to honor women's hockey history, so we're keeping the name. But you can check that out on the Black Rosie Media YouTube channel. We're doing a live stream model there. But you can also check out some of our archived Founding Four podcast shows on anywhere you listen to podcasts, which is pretty cool. And yeah, we'll do this again. Thank you, Maddie, Megan, Forrester, Vi over here. Who am I missing? Out of place 7. Thank you for the Red Wings. We have Striatic, of course. Thank you, everyone. I know Jeff was here earlier. Jesus, I don't remember what this was for, but I feel like there's a lot that I probably could have shrugged about. But thank you everyone for joining, and stay tuned if you're not already subscribed. But check out social media and of course your notifications, because I'll let you know when we do this again. And hopefully I'll get the timing and the time zone correct. But again, enjoy this view while you can, because I'm headed to the East Coast for a little bit, including hopefully to catch up with the Kraken and some people affiliated with the Kraken, whether it's been through some of the guest coaches or other things like that. So we've got some fun stuff on deck. But as always, I'll say, be kind to yourselves, be kind to one another. And for the Seattle Kraken, we talking about practice, because they had practice today. I love that for us. And then they hit the road for 2 weeks. But when they do hit the ice again, we say loud and proud. And always hold fast, stay true, and let's go Kraken. I'll catch you guys on the next stream. Peace out, everybody. Bye, and thank you. Enjoy your Saturday. Take care, everybody.